Chapter 127. The next day, in the palace of the Middle Empire, under the central palace, there was a huge and complicated secret passage that was like the Minas Labyrinth. It was the basic understanding of each emperor to have a backup plan. Additionally, it was the instinct of each generation of golden kings to dig a secret tunnel in their own imperial palace. As the Middle Empire passed down generations after generations of emperors, the number of secret passages increased. Until the recent Golden King ascended to the throne, the secret passage in the palace finally became a magnificent building that was just placed there and not used. Therefore, other than being the last resort of the emperor, the secret passage finally had some practical uses. For example, secret rooms, books, treasures, gathering places for the Shadow Guard, and rarely used prison cells. Originally, according to the style of the Middle Empire, it was absolutely impossible to use the palace as a prison cell. There were a few prisons everywhere in the Middle Empire, so there was no need to ruin the feng shui of the royal family. However, there were always exceptions to everything. There would always be a few scourges that you would not feel at ease if you did not put them under your feet and watch them day and night. For example, a highly skilled bandit, a relative of the Lee family who failed to rebel or fight for the throne, or a person who was supposed to be dead but for some reason could not be allowed to die. Another example was a young man who insisted on following the Megalosaurus to commit crimes and refused to turn back. Although he had been reduced to a prisoner, Bane wasn't as frightened as he had imagined. Instead, he seemed to have the spirit of a broken pot that was smashed to pieces. Since the other party did not kill him on the spot, he did not know why they did not want to kill him. Although Bane did not know the specific reason, he was sure that it had something to do with Jilin. As long as nothing happened to Jilin, he would be safe for the time being. Since that was the case, what was there to worry about? What could happen to Jilin? Even if the human race was wiped out, he would still be alive and well. Young man, how are you doing here? Is a special dungeon of the Imperial Palace comfortable? The Sword Saint's voice suddenly sounded from outside the dungeon. Bane was shocked by the sudden noise. He got up and walked to the cell door. He looked out and saw that not only was Sword Saint there, but also the Golden King and Qinlan. It's really not bad. The bedding in this dungeon is even better than when I lived in the village, Bane said, pretending to be calm. Of course, Sword Saint replied. Do you know that some of your cellmates would be relatives of the royal family if they were released to the outside world? Not everyone is qualified to come to this place. Golden King frowned. Although what Sacred Swordsman said was true, why did he have a feeling that Sacred Swordsman was ridiculing him? If he can turn over a new leaf, it's still not too late. Golden King said in a deep voice. An emperor's majesty naturally spread out. Previously, there were still some whispers in the dungeon, but now it was abnormally quiet. The emperor's majesty was like a prison. Even if I turn over a new leaf, what do you want me to do? Bane said. Tell us the red disaster's weakness. Qinlan's clear voice sounded. Although Qinlan's voice was as pleasant as a woman's, it was difficult to get close to her. This was because people could almost hear the rain of blood and war in her voice. He has no weakness, Bane said without hesitation. Besides, if he really had a weakness, how could Lord Sword Saint, who fought with him, not know? Don't even think about it. Golden King looked at Sword Saint. Sword Saint nodded helplessly. Even he didn't think the red disaster had any weaknesses. Even if it did, it wasn't a weakness to humans. You are the human closest to him. As long as you want to, there are some things that you can do. Golden King suddenly said after a moment of silence. Even if he stood there and let me chop him with a knife, I wouldn't be able to do anything to him. If you want me to help you kill him, aren't you thinking too highly of me? Bane's eyes widened. He felt that these people were really fantasizing about the impossible. You know that His Majesty isn't talking about that. Qinlan shouted. No matter what, Jilin is my benefactor. I can't betray him. Our village doesn't have such a tradition. Bane shook his head seriously. He's still the mortal enemy of humans. You're also a human. In the war against the red disaster, every human has a part to play. This isn't your personal matter, Qinlan said. There are countless humans in the world. I'm not one of them, Bane said. Besides, most of the time, it's humans who attack him first. In the Dwarf Kingdom, if it wasn't for the Snow-Wind Empire's relentless pursuit, how could there have been a Snowfire War? Are you trying to betray your own race? Qinlan was a soldier with a strong sense of patriotism. She couldn't understand Bane's betrayal at all. She punched the bars of the prison in anger. In my opinion, Jilin is better than most humans. Bane instinctively took a step back and said, no matter what, it was the Red Disaster who attacked the Saimai Empire first and kidnapped the princess. There's nothing wrong with that, right? You're also a citizen of the Saimai Empire. Are you willing to watch the princess be trapped in the hands of the enemy all day long, being tortured, unable to return to her home, and living in fear all day long? How can the princess of the empire suffer such humiliation? Prime Minister Zhuge hurried over. Bane looked at these people who were considered to be at the top of the human hierarchy. He suddenly didn't want to say anything more to these people. He turned around and walked back to the bed to lie down. These people didn't understand anything. They didn't know anything. Staya was indeed kidnapped by Jilin. But looking at Staya's daily life, Bane really couldn't associate it with living in fear all day long or being tortured. What a stubborn young man. Sword Saint looked at the Emperor and said, if that's the case, then let's do it. The Emperor waved his sleeves and turned to leave. Ever since he became the Emperor, this was the first time he experienced what it felt like to be kicked out. It's time to let the world see the strength of the Middle Empire. Don't disappoint me. Azan, how are the preparations? Your Majesty, everything is ready. Qinlan, how are things on your side? Everything is ready. The Emperor and the other two had already left. Only the guy Mingwei was still standing at the prison door looking at Bane. Sir Sword Saint, is there anything else? Bane saw that the Sword Saint hadn't left, so he sat up and asked politely. With only one legendary figure left, Bane naturally couldn't continue to lie down and pretend to be dead. There is, but before that, there's something I want to ask you. The Sword Saint used his finger as a sword and casually cut the chain on the prison door. The chain instantly broke and fell to the ground. The Sword Saint pushed open the prison door and looked at Bane with admiration. Young man, do you want to learn the sword? Chapter 128. Bane's eyes widened as he stared blankly at the rough stone ceiling of the dungeon. He thought for a few seconds, but he still couldn't figure out what Sir Sword Saint meant. But that didn't stop him from saying one word, yes. Sword Saint's smile suddenly became playful. He didn't expect this young man to agree so easily, and he even seemed a little impatient, so much so that he seemed a little shameless. Young man, let me ask you, if one day that Megalosaurus feels that humans are too much of an eyesore and wants to destroy us humans, what will you do? No, he won't. He just thinks that humans aren't worth mentioning. Why would he waste so much effort? I mean, if. The Sword Saint enunciated each word clearly and solemnly. Every word that Sword Saint said was like a sharp sword that accurately pierced into Bane's brain. It made Bane's mind tremble. He couldn't help but imagine the scene that Sword Saint said. The mighty and majestic human army covered the entire wasteland and spread to the horizon. Every one of them had an expression full of anger and despair under their helmets. They all held their weapons tightly and wanted to charge and break through the enemy lines. But they were all dead and covered in blood. The human blood soaked the entire wasteland that was dry all year round. In the entire world, all the human towns and villages were burning fiercely. The world seemed to have turned into a huge furnace. No, it was more like the hell described in Staya's Holy Bible. Jilin's familiar figure hovered in the sky. His figure could be seen in any corner of the world. Women hugged their children and ran around crying. But the entire world was burning. They had nowhere to run. Everyone was wailing in grief as the magnificent palace collapsed in the raging fire. The elemental creatures in the Red Dragon Palace were very happy in the fire. It was as if they were having a party. Stop! Bane suddenly shouted and slammed his fist on the ground. Blood splattered everywhere. Bane was panting heavily. Cold sweat poured down his forehead like a waterfall. It was because of pain and also because of fear. Sword Saint was surprised. He didn't expect this young man to be able to escape from his mental attack so quickly. It seemed like he underestimated this young man who followed the megalosaurus. Bane swallowed hard and raised his bloodshot eyes to look at the grand swordsman. Swordsmen can also use spiritual attacks. If you can master one, then you can master all. Everything can be used as a sword. Naturally, the sword can be used as everything. What do you mean? Since you don't want to think about it and don't think about it, I'll help you. The sword saint helped Bane up. Let me ask you one more time. If what you imagined really happened, what would you do? I won't. What if? He won't do that, and I won't let it happen. That's good. In the evening, the sun was setting in the west. The warm red sun dyed the entire capital with a faint golden-red halo. It was like an orange lantern that warmed the entire street. It also made Jilin's reddish hair look like a ball of flame. The vermilion bird street that ran through the entire capital was now empty. Only the evening wind carried a few fallen leaves as it hurriedly passed by. It was as if everyone in the city had suddenly evaporated. It was eerily quiet. Jilin carried the third prince and walked alone on the vermilion bird street towards the imperial palace. He didn't care about why the city had suddenly become so quiet. The third prince was carried by Jilin, but he still had the leisure to look around. Looking at the empty vermilion bird street, he couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder. Brother Long, your extravagance is quite grand. The entire vermilion bird street is empty. This is the first time I've seen such a scene. It's only right, Jilin said. The third prince was suddenly choked and couldn't say anything. Not long after, Jilin arrived at the imperial palace. The third prince opened his mouth in shock and couldn't help but sigh, "Amazing, amazing." It turned out that the imperial palace didn't close when it was time like usual. Instead, it was completely open. The imperial palace with its huge open doors was like a giant beast with its mouth wide open, ready to swallow the heavens and the earth. It was shocking. Your Excellency really is a man of his words. This old man has been waiting here for a long time. Prime Minister Zhuge stood on the side of the imperial palace gate. He was neither servile nor overbearing. He cupped his hands and stood there. It seemed like he was really here to welcome Jilin. Yes. Jilin nodded lightly. Prime Minister saw that the third prince was tied up by Jilin and couldn't help but purse his lips. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Excellency, although you don't understand, the imperial family also needs face. Isn't it a bit inappropriate for you to tie up a prince like this? Please untie the third prince. I'm sure that with your Excellency's methods, you won't be worried that the third prince will escape." Jilin glanced at Prime Minister Zhuge and casually threw the third prince to the ground. The rope that was originally tied to the third prince actually loosened on its own. He didn't really want to tie up the third prince. Jilin just wanted to have fun, just for the occasion. Prime Minister Zhuge looked deeply at the third prince and gestured to Jilin, "Your Excellency, please come this way." Jilin nodded and followed Prime Minister Zhuge into the imperial palace without looking sideways. Not long after, Jilin followed this extremely slow human to the largest hall in the imperial palace, the plaza in front of the Wuji Palace. It was the same plaza that Bane had been lying on the roof for 4 to 6 hours without finding a chance to take advantage of. "Reporting to your majesty, the person has been brought here," Prime Minister Zhuge shouted the moment they entered the plaza. Then, he cupped his hands towards Jilin and hurriedly left. The Wuji Palace was the tallest building in the entire capital. Not only was it extremely tall and majestic, it was also located on the highest terrain on the foundation. From the plaza in front of Jilin to the entrance of the Wuji Palace, one would have to pass through 200 to 300 white jade stairs. A person wearing yellow clothes was sitting in front of the entrance of the Wuji Palace, looking down at Jilin from above. Jilin was slightly annoyed. "Your Majesty is truly bold. Back when we parted in the Snow Wind Empire, your Majesty is still as elegant as ever." Sword Saint stood in front of the white jade stairs, holding a long sword in his hand, and said loudly, "You clearly know that we have set up layers of traps here, yet you still dare to come alone without any precautions. Do you really think that we can't do anything to you? You are too arrogant." Jilin heard Sword Saint's words and sneered disdainfully. "Ridiculous. You're just a lucky survivor, yet you dare to boast so shamelessly." I really want to see what you can do to me. Your Majesty is right. Since that is the case, then I won't be polite. Sword Saint had already expected Jilin's attitude. Sword Saint looked at Qinlan, who was standing beside the Emperor, wearing a golden battle armor. The Grand Marshal of the West raised his right hand, and suddenly, the small door in the surroundings was pushed open. From behind the door, a black mass of soldiers rushed out. These were not the palace guards, but the Western garrison army that followed Qinlan on her campaigns all year round. Countless soldiers surrounded the entire square in the blink of an eye, making it so that not even a drop of water could pass through. Jilin stood in place without moving. He turned his head and glanced at the surrounding soldiers, then looked at Sword Saint strangely. What are you doing? Could it be that this is another human mass suicide drama? Sword Saint's face instantly darkened. Formation. Qinlan personally took out a command flag and began to command the soldiers to move. In just 2 to 3 breaths of time, the soldiers were like a single entity, turning into an incomparably repetitive pattern, and it was still constantly moving. As the pattern formed by the soldiers kept moving, a large golden array appeared on the ground and in the sky above the square. Not only did the array have complicated lines like Aisha's array, but also had the azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise, the 4 mythical beasts unique to the Middle Empire. Sword Saint pointed his sword at Jilin. 10 heavenly soldiers, 4 saints array, please instruct me. Jilin grabbed the 3rd prince, who was standing behind him, and pulled him in front of him. Give me Bane and the Imperial Jade Seal. I will give you the 3rd prince. Brother Long, I really am not worth a single Imperial Jade Seal. The 3rd prince said in a slightly sobbing tone. 10 heavenly soldiers, 4 saints array, please instruct me. Sword Saint repeated. Jilin was silent for a moment, then casually threw the 3rd prince behind him, and said in a low voice, All right. Chapter 129. Every human who had participated in the Battle of Ice and Fire and luckily survived would have a shadow cast over their hearts, and would often wake up in the middle of the night. And this shadow in their hearts was undoubtedly Jilin's shadow. Jilin's sudden appearance had dealt a heavy blow to these legendary masters, and the one who had suffered the most should be Sword Saint and Gai Mingwei. In that battle, the sword of light that had accompanied him for many years had been broken. To a sword cultivator, this was definitely more tragic than the Emperor of Physique, Musin, losing an arm. Therefore, Sword Saint should be the one who had experienced Jilin's godlike strength the most. It was impossible for him to have the absurd idea that he would be able to win against Jilin by putting his life on the line. This was also what Jilin found the most strange. In his understanding, when humans were faced with a powerful enemy that they couldn't fight back, they would generally have 3 ways to deal with it. They could either seek help from others, retreat, or die in the worst-case scenario. However, Sword Saint was obviously not one of these 3. That meant that Sword Saint felt that he had a chance of winning against Jilin. Jilin was very curious. What exactly was it that gave Sword Saint such inexplicable confidence? The 2 identical formations above and below began to rotate in opposite directions. Jilin, who was in the middle of the formation, could clearly feel 2 forces pulling at his body in opposite directions. If it was an ordinary person like Bane in the middle of the formation, his body would probably be torn to shreds in an instant. Jilin tried to move his body. If it was under normal circumstances, Jilin would naturally be able to ignore this bit of force. However, he was only a doppelganger now. Although it was not enough to be killed by the formation, the entanglement of the 2 forces greatly slowed down Jilin's movements. Sword Saint waved his sword and walked with a graceful pace. In just a few steps, he had reached the western side of the formation. He raised his sword and shouted. The white tiger of the west responds to the swordsman's mansion. The quality of a hero, the sound of solemn voice, the might of a beast, the roar of the forest, come to my left. After the Sword Saint finished speaking, the images of the white tigers on the 2 formations seemed to come alive. They leaped out of the formation and jumped on a Sword Saint's body. The Sword Saint's body suddenly shone with a golden light. The images of the two white tigers slowly moved around the Sword Saint's body. In the Middle Empire's white tiger, the white tiger was of the metal element. With the support of the white tiger's divine power, the Sword Saint was like a tiger that had grown wings. To be honest, Jilin was a bit stunned, because the Sword Saint said a bunch of words with a serious expression that sounded extremely awesome, but he couldn't understand them at all. Jilin was a bit angry, because Aisha had once said that when two people conversed and one person kept talking while the other didn't understand, it was either because the speaker was too stupid or because the listener was too retarded. Of course, Jilin didn't think that he was retarded. What is this? Jilin watched the show for a long time, but he couldn't figure out what was going on. Although the human's formation was grand and imposing, he didn't understand it at all. Sword Saint knew that the Red Disaster wouldn't attack him while he was chanting, because the Red Disaster looked down on humans. Many of the humans' schemes and traps were nothing more than clowns' comedic performances in the eyes of the Red Disaster. After all, who would destroy an actor's performance before they even started chanting? That was why the Sword Saint dared to use such a method so openly. Since the power of humans is insignificant to you, then try this white tiger's divine power. Regarding the white tiger divine force mentioned by the Sword Saint, Jilin had a face full of disdain, not taking it seriously. However, he didn't say anything. After spending so much time with Staya, he knew that humans always believed that the gods would help the devout humans and would always watch over them. Humans always thought that the gods were omniscient, omnipotent, and emotionless existences. That was why the gods would help the humans for free. All they wanted was a devout heart. How laughable! How could the gods be selfless? If the gods were really as humans thought, how could Lucifer start a rebellion in the heavenly realm and get half of the heavenly realm to support it? These things were written in the books of the Church of Light and were distributed all over the world. However, humans all ignored this matter because humans only believed what they wanted to believe. The Sword Saint obviously didn't think that his white tiger's divine power would make Jilin think of so many things. With that, the Sword Saint thrust out his sword. With the sword as his body, he turned into a beam of sword light and arrived in front of Jilin in the blink of an eye. Facing the Sword Saint's sword, Jilin immediately stopped joking. The sword hadn't reached him yet, but he felt like countless blades were slashing his face. The sword's aura was extremely sharp. It was Jilin's first time seeing such a sharp sword, a sword that was enough to hurt his body. The Sword Saint finished his attack in the blink of an eye and stopped moving. It felt like he didn't stab here from afar, but had always been here and hadn't moved at all. Jilin's body moved slightly. It seemed like he took half a step back, but it also seemed like he didn't. However, his arm began to bleed. It was abnormally bright red. It was unbelievable. The Sword Saint's attack actually hurt Jilin. The Sword Saint suddenly saw the blood on Jilin's arm, and his eyes instantly revealed an overjoyed expression. If he could hurt him like this, then he might be able to kill this mortal enemy of the human race on the spot. However, the Sword Saint's past experience made this thought disappear with the wind in less than a moment. What are you? You cut off my arm again. You've gone too far. Jilin looked at the wound on his arm and immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. He stomped his foot and punched towards the Sword Saint. Originally, Jilin's punch was extremely fast. It was like a white steed flitting across a crevice. However, in this 10-direction celestial soldier's four saints formation, the Sword Saint could barely catch the trajectory of Jilin's punch. Bright moon sword technique, reverse luster. Moonlight flashed in front of the Sword Saint. Every one of them was a sword. With the help of the white tiger's divine power, the Sword Saint's sword technique that was already at the peak of perfection was now even further improved. He could now effortlessly execute exquisite swordsmanship. Facing the Sword Saint's sword technique, even Jilin couldn't find a flaw in it. However, this punch was already like an arrow on a bowstring. He had no choice but to release it. He could only forcefully throw out a punch. With a boom, Jilin's fist smashed onto the Sword Saint's sword. The long sword in the Sword Saint's hand glowed with golden light. Two tiger roars faintly sounded from the Sword Saint's body. Even though it was a helpless punch, it still caused the Sword Saint to fall back uncontrollably. However, the Sword Saint perfectly withstood it. How is it? The Sword Saint shook his slightly numb wrist and said to Jilin proudly. Jilin looked at the Sword Saint in shock. After exchanging blows with the Sword Saint, he already understood that the White Tiger's divine power that the Sword Saint spoke of wasn't just a gimmick. It was a type of true divine power. Although this bit of power was insignificant to the gods, gods were still gods. However, a god was a god. Even if he only had a little bit of divine power, he might be invincible in the human world and be a tyrant. The fact that a human could use divine power was enough to shock people. However, Jilin wasn't a human. He wasn't shocked because the Sword Saint could use divine power. He was shocked because what kind of god was so free? Could it be that gods were so bored? Chapter 130. Jilin deeply despised the fact that a god would so easily lend his power to a human. He felt that the god did not have the sense of mystery that a god should have. He did not have the slightest bit of restraint. However, no matter how much Jilin despised the White Tiger god, it could not change the fact that the Sword Saint had the power of the White Tiger and was standing in front of him with a sword in hand. The worst thing was that he had already figured out the Sword Saint's true strength, which meant that the Sword Saint had also figured out his true strength. His current strength was not that deep and bottomless for the Sword Saint. I have to say, as a human, you did pretty well. Jilin looked at the Sword Saint and said, "Don't say that too early. This is only the tip of the iceberg." The Sword Saint grinned. "Then what are you waiting for? If you have any tricks up your sleeve, just use them." The Sword Saint seemed to be mocking himself. He chuckled and shook his head. "For the current you, there is no need for those. If it was the real me, your formation would be like an egg hitting a rock. You're a special human, so you should understand." Jilin said, "Human, you should be a little smarter. Put down your pointless pride and dignity. Give me Bane and the Imperial Jade Seal. Don't force me to make a move. Otherwise, you will all be reduced to ashes." "Ha ha!" The Sword Saint looked up to the sky and laughed. "What's so funny?" Jilin asked. "You don't believe me. I believe you. But so what if I'm reduced to ashes? As the saying goes, I'm not afraid of dying. I want to remain pure in this world." The Sword Saint said, "You don't have to worry about Bane. We are all humans. We will not do anything to him for the time being. As for the Imperial Jade Seal, even if the Middle Empire falls, I will let you know what it means to die in glory rather than live in dishonor." "Good, good, good." Jilin smiled and applauded Sword Saint 3 times, very slowly and steadily. Every time he clapped, he would say the word "good." "However, can you represent the Middle Empire? Perhaps there are people here who are waiting for you to give me the Imperial Jade Seal," Jilin said to the countless soldiers standing in the square. "So, you don't even know what a human is, or you wouldn't say that." The Sword Saint looked back at the high and mighty Golden King and asked, "Your Majesty, what do you think?" "Oomph. What's the point of saying so much?" The Golden King slapped the armrest of the chair hard. Even though his cultivation was not very high, he could still transmit his voice clearly to everyone's ears. "Soldiers, what do you think?" Sword Saint asked again. "Until death do us part." Qinlan raised his sword and shouted in an awe-inspiring voice. "Till death do us part. Until death do us part. Until death do us part." Nearly 10,000 soldiers roared in unison with their blood boiling. Their voices pierced through the clouds and cracked the stones, shaking the heavens and earth. "Do you have anything else to say?" Sword Saint asked with a smile full of pride. This was the pride of being born as a human. This was the pride of being born as a human. That's all. Jilin's face was like a spring breeze, but his voice was incomparably cold. "Then, human, prepare yourself for the next time we meet. Trust me, it won't be too long. Be careful." As soon as Jilin's voice fell, his entire body began to rapidly turn red. Sword Saint's pupils suddenly shrank. A hair-raising sense of danger welled up in his heart. Sword Saint made a prompt decision and rushed out, at the same time shouting, "Second God power! Trap!" Sword Saint had already left the large formation when he finished shouting. He stood at the edge of the formation and stared unblinkingly at Jilin, who was still turning red. The formation of the soldiers outside the formation instantly changed. The azure dragon and black tortoise patterns on the formation lit up at the same time. Jilin looked at the Four Saints formation, smiled slightly, and said indifferently, "Not bad." Before he finished speaking, Jilin turned into countless fire elements and exploded with a loud bang. However, this incomparably turbulent flame was successfully blocked by the Four Saints formation. The flame was trapped between the two formations, turning into a huge fireball in the middle of the formation. It kept burning and rolling, as if it was endless. Although the explosion did not make a single sound, but the entire palace, and more than half of the capital, was shaking nonstop. There were houses collapsing everywhere, and the sound of chickens flying and dogs jumping could be heard. The emperor's head was covered in cold sweat. He thought to himself that it was all thanks to Azan that most of the people in the capital were moved out in advance. Otherwise, who knew how many people would have suffered from this unexpected disaster? Perhaps their families would be ruined because of this. After a long time, the fireball finally slowly dissipated, and the originally flat square had a large round hole in it. Many of the small palaces in the palace that had been in disrepair for a long time had collapsed. The Imperial Garden was a terrible sight, and the beasts in the Spirit Beast Garden were frightened. If the palace was already like this, there was no need to mention the ordinary people's houses. Countless houses and residences were damaged, but fortunately, they had already gone out to hide in advance after everything calmed down. Sword Saint looked at the countless dilapidated walls in front of him and said to Bane, who had appeared behind him at some point, "Did you see it?" "See what?" Bane asked. "The disaster he has caused to mankind. This was just an insignificant doppelganger, but the losses it brought to the human race were so shocking. No, he is a disaster. Disasters never give people time to prepare, but he will. If he wants to, you won't be able to change the formation, and you won't be able to escape. When a cat catches a mouse, it will never kill it in one bite. In his eyes, this is probably just a pastime." "That's true. You don't mean what you say. This formation is not bad. Why didn't you use it before?" "Naturally, it's because this formation can't be used without permission." "Why?" "Because..." Sword Saint had just said 2 words when he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell straight to the ground. Bane saw Sword Saint suddenly fall without any warning and was shocked. He quickly leaned over to Sword Saint's side and shouted, "Hey, what happened to you?" "This is the backlash from using the power of God." Qin Lan's voice sounded from behind Bane, and there was a hint of regret in her voice, as if she had already expected Sword Saint's condition. "How can the power of God be so easy to use? Even if he is my teacher, he is still human. But it's a pity that after paying such a huge price, it was only a clone. What a pity." When Bane heard Qin Lan's words, he looked up blankly and realized that more than half of the 10,000 soldiers were lying on the ground. Their faces were pale, and their breaths were weak. It was easy to see that the remaining soldiers were barely hanging on. Sword Saint was not the only one who had to bear the consequences, but also the 10,000 soldiers. They were all people like Bane. In the courtyard by the lake, Staya, who had tried to stop Jilin from going to the palace, was now lying on the ground in the main hall. Her breathing was stable, but she was not asleep. She had been knocked out by Jilin. Aisha sat quietly on the chair and stroked Xiaohei's feathers. She wondered if she should get another cat. There was a bronze oil lamp placed on the table. The flame in the lamp was burning steadily, releasing a gentle light. Even if the night wind occasionally drilled in through the hole in the wall, the flame did not waver. It was strangely stable, because this was not something that originally existed in the house. It was Aisha's collection. Suddenly, the bronze lamp went out without any warning. Aisha's eyes widened. She covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Oh my God, the Middle Empire is really unpredictable. Jilin's clone has the power of a god. I didn't expect him to die here. Luckily, I didn't go to the palace." Aisha shook her head. She glanced at Staya, who was lying on the ground. To prevent her from waking up, she cast 2 more spells. Then she squatted down and carried Staya on her shoulder. She turned around and left the courtyard. She entered the darkness and disappeared. This was what they had agreed on before. Aisha told Jilin that if he died in the palace, she would take Staya away and find a place to hide, because she could not defeat Sword Saint. Jilin agreed and knocked out Staya. Otherwise, Aisha might not be able to kidnap her. Aisha thought she was just joking. She did not expect her words to come true. Wasteland, Beast God Mountain. If the wasteland south of the human border was the place where the orcs lived for generations, then Beast God Mountain was undoubtedly the holy land in every orc's heart. Although there were many orc tribes, and they were all independent, they all had a common king. Every generation's Beast King lived in the Beast God Mountain, and every generation's Beast King was the strongest of their generation. Every generation's Beast King had to defeat the previous generation's Beast King to obtain the throne. It was said that the Southern Exian Empire's method of selecting the heir to the throne was also based on this style. The orcs did not believe in bloodlines. They only believed in the law of the jungle. For the past 20 years, the king of the orcs was the chief of the lion tribe, Sing. Sing was invincible in the entire tribe. He could fight with Musin without losing. However, he was defeated a few days ago and was removed from the throne. The new king of the orcs was called Jilin. Chapter 131. In the Beast God Mountain, in the Beast God Temple, the Dwarf King and the previous Beast King, Sing, were sitting opposite each other, having a friendly talk. This talk was undoubtedly a great meeting with a great significance that transcended the era. The dwarf race, who lived in the northernmost part of the world all year round, and the orc race, who lived in the southernmost part of the world for generations, this was the first real communication in history. Because it was the first time they met each other, no one could figure out what the other party was up to, so they could only go straight to the point. Sing said, "Our orc race has lived in this barren wasteland for generations, and our people have a difficult life. We have long wanted to go to the human territory to occupy some good mountains and water. It's just that the orc race has a large population, but weapons and equipment are very scarce. On the other hand, the humans are well equipped, with strong armor and sharp spears. Although the orc race has infinite strength, they can't gain any advantage in a war with the humans, so they can only complain." The Dwarf King said, "Now that the beastmen have the help of the dwarves, this point will no longer exist. In the future, every beastman warrior will wear the tailor-made armor of the dwarves and carry the world's strongest and sharpest weapons. In terms of weapons and equipment, the humans are far inferior to the dwarves." The two of them talked happily, and it didn't take long for them to determine the general direction in which the two races would work together. The orcs would charge in front, and the dwarves would provide sufficient weapons and equipment behind them. Together, they would attack the humans, occupy rich lands, and create a beautiful future for the two races. The two kings were in high spirits as they talked. They were extremely excited. It was as if the beautiful life of their people was right in front of them, at their fingertips. Sing, who had a lion head and a human body, was as majestic as a small mountain. Not only was he more than 2 meters tall, every bulge of his muscles was as beautiful as a sculpture, and his blood-red mane was as smooth as silk carefully woven by humans, shining brightly. Occasionally, his hearty laughter would echo in the spacious Beast God Cave. The Dwarf King was also very proud. He felt that he could finally get his revenge for leaving his tribe. The best part was that the Beastmen had taken the initiative to go to the front lines and kill the enemy. This way, the dwarves wouldn't suffer too many losses. The two of them were talking in full swing, and only Jilin was sitting on the highest chair in the Beast God Cave, playing with the orc race's heirloom crown. His eyes were empty, and he clearly expressed that he was just here to sit, and they could talk, don't worry about him. The current Beast King Jilin, on the second day of his ascension, completely delegated the authority to manage the Beastmen race to the previous Beast King, Sing. Everyone in the orc race thought he was wise. When Jilin and the Dwarf King, the king just casually forged orc race, the orc race just casually forged a few weapons, and weapons the orc king was praised. Just when the Dwarf King was feeling complacent, thinking that he could peacefully and easily win over the orc race. Jilin took advantage of the time when he was forging a sword to beat down the orc race's chieftain. Moreover, Jilin didn't control his strength well this time. The Dwarf King looked at the orc race's chieftain's injuries and thought that it was fortunate that he was an orc. If a dwarf or a human had suffered such heavy injuries, they wouldn't be able to stand up in the future. The right side of his body didn't have a single good bone left. The orc race's eyes turned red. How could they let a human beat up their chieftain like this in their own tribe? They all wanted to fight Jilin to the death. It wasn't until Jilin showed his hand covered in red scales that the orcs pinched their noses and recognized that this was a duel between orcs. Although they recognized it, it was still their chieftain who was beaten up. Everyone couldn't help but feel a little unbalanced. They thought to themselves, "What's going on with you, a crocodile, coming to the orc race's chieftain to cause trouble for no reason?" Hence, the orcs thought about it and told Jilin that there was a leopard race tribe further south, and their chieftain was also a rare and powerful warrior. This was exactly what Jilin wanted. He had long been displeased with the Dwarf King's method of bribery. He felt that it was too troublesome. Naturally, Jilin defeated the leopard race's chieftain. After that, the bear race, the elephant race, the eagle race, the silver wolf race, the white tiger race, and finally, Jilin fought all the way to the Beast God Mountain and challenged Sing to a Beast King challenge. In the battle, Sing unleashed earth-shattering attacks. That aura was definitely not inferior to any of the human legendary masters. However, no matter how earth-shattering Sing's attack was, it was still not enough. Scarlet Qilin Wu effortlessly dealt with all of them. Sing felt that his attack on Jilin was like what the humans said, an ant trying to shake a tree. At this point, Jilin had completely taken over all the forces of the orcs under his command. The Dwarf King looked at Jilin, who was wearing the Beast King crown. At this moment, he even had the thought of, should I destroy all 5 human empires? Under the circumstances where the heavenly barrier has not been opened, it's impossible for the dwarf race to send large amounts of weapons to the orcs' territory. That's because to reach the orcs' territory from the Gerda volcano range, they have to pass through a short section of the Saimai Empire's territory and a longer distance of the Nanshin Empire's territory, the Dwarf King said. Judging from the things that the dwarf race can provide now, it's just a drop in the bucket for the orcs' needs. Then how can we talk about our cooperation? The Nanshin Empire can't just stand by and watch you arm us orcs with large amounts of weapons. Well, since we're here, we're naturally not unprepared. As long as we can directly break the heavenly barrier or open a path through the heavenly barrier, then we can naturally transport weapons and equipment directly from the Dwarf Kingdom to the orcs. That's easy for you to say. The heavenly barrier separates the volcano and the wilderness, and it has existed since ancient times. We orcs have lived in the wilderness for generations, and we've never heard of anyone who can cross the heavenly barrier. That's the real heavenly barrier. No life can cross this barrier. But your king doesn't seem to think so, the Dwarf King said as he looked at Jilin. Sing suddenly stood up. He was so nervous that his hands were trembling. He said to Jilin, "Your Majesty, can you really break that heavenly barrier?" Jilin suddenly came back to his senses. "What did you say?" Sing froze for a moment. He didn't think that he and the Dwarf King were talking in front of the new king, and the new king really didn't hear them at all. "I said, can you really open the heavenly barrier?" "Yes, as long as I can successfully get the god spirit, it shouldn't be a problem for me to refine my sword into a divine artifact." Jilin thought for a moment and said, "Then dare I ask, Your Majesty, what do you want to do after arming the orcs?" Sing asked. "Of course it's to start a war and attack the humans." Jilin said, as if it was a matter of course, "Don't you think that the humans alone occupy most of the world's land and resources, and the other races can only shrink in a corner? Isn't that a very unfair thing?" "All the orcs must think so," Sing nodded. "The dwarves also think so," the Dwarf King echoed. "So, isn't it natural for us to ask the humans to give us a little bit of space?" Jilin pointed to the sky outside and said heroically, "Of course it is." Sing said, "I just don't know. Where exactly is this little bit you're referring to?" Jilin raised his hand and motioned to the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King took out a very old and mottled craft paper from his close-fitting cloth bag. When he opened it, it turned out to be a map. This is the world map that we, the dwarf race, have collected the maps of the other races' territories and sorted out. The Dwarf King said very solemnly, although it can't be said to be completely accurate, it should be roughly correct. The dwarf race really lives up to its reputation. Sing exclaimed. This is enough, Jilin said, and then pointed at the map. Here, the Dwarf King and Sing looked over at the same time and saw that Jilin's fingertip had stopped on a long line. A long line on the world map, in reality, was an extremely wide river basin. There were 2 words marked on the line, Luo River. It was the river that the Golden King had sent to fix after the 16th prince of the Middle Empire failed to usurp the throne. It was the longest river in the world that ran through the Simi Empire, the Middle Empire, and the Divine Dragon Empire. What's wrong with this river? Sing couldn't figure out what the king meant. On the other hand, the Dwarf King suddenly had a bad premonition. There's nothing wrong with this river, Jilin said. What I mean is, if we fight to the side of this side of the river will belong to us, and that side will belong to them. Sing stared at the new Orc King with his eyes wide open, his face full of disbelief. Hearing the king's words, it seemed like he wanted half of the entire human territory. And looking at the world map, it could be said that the king wanted half of the entire world. Chapter 132. Sing was originally a forthright man. He boasted that he had led the Beastmen for many years and was fearless in this world. He was an all-powerful figure and was extremely ambitious. Ever since he became the Beastman King, he had completely stopped killing each other in order to accumulate strength and invade some human territories. Now, compared to the new king, Sing felt that his original ideas were like children playing house. However, it could also be said that Jilin's ideas were too shocking. Although Sing admired the new king's incomparably ambitious ideas, he still braced himself and said for the countless beastmen, "My king, if we follow your plan, then our beastmen army will have to completely occupy the southern Exian Empire. Then, we will have to conquer half of the Middle Empire, the Divine Dragon Empire, and the Simi Empire." Is that so? Jilin suddenly shouted. "I didn't look at it carefully before. Let me take a look again." "Okay, take a good look." Sing hurriedly used his large hand to turn the map in front of Jilin, hoping that he would take a closer look. Sing felt that the king must have made a mistake to let the dwarf race and the beastmen race fight against the 4 human empires. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had such an idea. It was a sure death. Jilin frowned and looked at the map seriously, as if he was thinking about how to modify his previous plans. The Dwarf King and Sing looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. Even the 2 of them felt that Jilin's previous plan was too ridiculous. It was completely unfeasible. Even if they were asleep at night, they shouldn't think like that. According to Jilin's plan, this was like letting a wolf bite 4 tigers at the same time. Then Jilin told the wolf to bite one of the tigers to death and bite the other 3 half to death. What kind of idea was this wolf thinking? Jilin studied it for a long time before finally nodding and saying, "That's true. Thank you for reminding me in time. This is what your subordinates should do," Sing said with a smile. He thought, "How can I not remind you? If I don't remind you, my beastmen race will be gone. I can't touch the Simi Empire. I made an oath back then," Jilin said seriously. When Sing heard that, he immediately took a deep breath. He didn't quite understand, or rather, he didn't want to understand what Jilin meant. "What? You seem to be saying that the Simi Empire can't be touched, but the Divine Dragon Empire, the Middle Empire, and the Nanshan Empire can be touched?" As expected, Jilin didn't give Sing much time to think before he made his intentions clear. "Since we can't touch the Simi Empire, let's take down the Divine Dragon Empire as well. That's about it." Sing was almost stunned by the new king's mind-boggling thought process. Now, the king didn't need the wolf to bite the 4 tigers. Instead, there were 3 tigers. However, he had to bite 2 of them to death and leave the last one half dead. "Your Majesty, the human empires aren't villages." Sing, who was over 2 meters tall and as majestic as a mountain, sounded like he was about to cry. "Your Majesty, You just took the throne not long ago. You might not know this, but the power of the Beastmen race can't even defeat the Nanshin Empire. Over the years, the Nanshin Empire had to divert most of its forces to fight against the other human empires while maintaining stability in the country. Just this alone can prevent our race from taking a step into the Nanshin Empire with its remaining forces. Now, even with the full support of the dwarves, we can only occupy a small portion of the Nanshin Empire's territory at most. Brother Singh, don't underestimate the dwarves too much, the Dwarf King said. Now, the technology of the dwarves is changing with each passing day. It has far exceeded your imagination. I believe that as long as our races work together, defeating the Nanshin Empire shouldn't be a problem. It's just that it's really impossible to attack the Middle Empire and the Divine Dragon Empire. The Dwarf King's last sentence was obviously directed at Jilin. Now, the Dwarf King and Singh had the same idea. They were thinking of a way to make Jilin give up on that crazy idea. For some reason, Jilin didn't speak for a long time. The Dwarf King and Singh thought that Jilin had been convinced by them. A terrifyingly high temperature suddenly dispersed from Jilin's body. However, it dissipated as quickly as it came. Even Singh, who had legendary strength, felt as if he had been roasted in a blazing furnace just now. He wondered if the new king had flown into a rage out of humiliation. The Dwarf King was fine. After all, he had grown up beside furnaces and lived under volcanoes. He had followed Jilin for some time and knew that Jilin wouldn't get angry over such a thing. Thus, he asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Let's wait for a while. I have to make a trip to the Middle Empire first," Jilin suddenly said as he raised his head. The color of his eyes became brighter than gold. "You got the god spirit?" The Dwarf King's beard trembled with excitement. If he could get the god spirit, the long-cherished wish of the dwarves for thousands of years would be fulfilled. "No." Jilin shook his head and said, "There was a problem. The doppelganger I placed in the Middle Empire exploded. Bane was caught, and Staya was knocked out by me. Aisha should have taken Staya and run away." What are these?" the Dwarf King asked with a blank face. "Nothing. I'll make a trip there. I'll definitely bring the god spirit back for you." Jilin patted the Dwarf King's shoulder and walked out of the orc god cave. "After that, I'll wait for you to turn the giant sword into a divine artifact. I won't disappoint you." The Dwarf King bowed and saluted to Jilin's back. "What's the name of the divine artifact?" Jilin stopped and thought for a while before saying, "Mountain Slash. It really lives up to its name." The Dwarf King praised. Suddenly, a red megalosaurus appeared in the sky above the Orc God Mountain. He stretched his huge body slightly in the air, then instantly flew into the clouds and disappeared. Majestic, beautiful, noble, ferocious, powerful. This was what every orc who saw the megalosaurus thought. Every orc who saw the megalosaurus bowed down sincerely from the bottom of their hearts and shouted, "King!" Even the previous Orc King Singh was no exception. It was not until Jilin had left for a long time that Singh stood up from the ground. He looked in the direction that Jilin flew in and did not speak for a long time. After a while, he said with emotion, "A real dragon. This is the real Orc King." The Dwarf King could not help but chuckle. He really did not expect the orcs to have a tradition of dragon worship. He joked, "What real Orc King? Weren't you the Orc King before?" "It's not the same." Singh sighed. "When I and the previous Orc Kings were in power, the people under me were not thinking about how to be loyal to us, but how to kill us and replace us. But in my opinion, if the Orc King was him, I'm afraid that even if he was too old to move one day, no orc would be disloyal. This is the Orc King that the heavens gave to the orcs." The Dwarf King looked at Singh's expression of reverence, as if Jilin was a god. He thought that if Jilin came to the wilderness and directly revealed his true form and flew around the orc tribes, there would be no need for a fight. The orcs would definitely bow down and worship him. Then what do you think of the Orc King's plan to attack the 3 empires that he mentioned just now? The Dwarf King had a playful look on his face. "Let's not talk about this first." Singh raised his hand to stop the Dwarf King from talking about this. This matter could not be mentioned. Just thinking about it gave him a headache, At the border between the Sami Empire and the Middle Empire, a lone human was trekking alone in the wilderness. He was wearing a yellow overcoat, carrying a bag and a long object wrapped in yellow cloth. It looked like a sword. There were no signs of human habitation nearby. There were only soldiers guarding the borders of the two empires. This person took out a small book and opened it to show it to the soldiers guarding the borders. Then, this person easily crossed the border between the Middle Empire and the Sami Empire, as if he was going home. Not only did the soldiers from both sides not check his belongings, they also silently let him pass without saying a word. This was because this person was holding an emergency customs clearance document jointly issued by the five empires. Holding this paper, not to mention crossing the border, even if he entered the palace of any empire at night, no one would stop him. After this person successfully crossed the border, he continued to walk east without stopping. It was not until he reached a clear mountain spring that he decided to take a rest. He had been walking for a long time today. He placed the bag on the ground and knelt beside the stream to drink from it. The sweet spring water immediately lifted his spirits. Just as he was about to bend down to drink a few more mouthfuls, a red figure suddenly flashed across the clear water surface. This person ignored the danger of breaking his neck and forcefully raised his head. The hood that had been on his head was also thrown down. Although Jilin's figure was as graceful as a swan and as fast as lightning, he was still unable to hide from the human's gaze. Or rather, he had never thought of hiding. Although it was just a glimpse, he finally got his wish and saw the figure that he had been thinking about day and night, the culprit who had killed all his family members. Roar stood up and pulled out his fingernails from his palms. His palms were still bleeding. However, he did not seem to feel anything. He silently picked up the bag, carried it on his back, and continued to walk east. He wanted to keep walking east and keep walking. He wanted to cross the Middle Empire, then the Divine Dragon Empire, all the way to the easternmost part of the Divine Dragon Empire. He wanted to walk to that sea. He wanted to use the Sacred Sword's guidance to cross that sea and find the legendary Elven Island. He wanted to obtain the true power of the Sacred Sword. He wanted to kill the red megalosaurus that had just flown over his head. The Red Disaster. Because he was Roar, he was a hero. Chapter 133. The second day of Jilin's havoc in the palace. In the Middle Empire's palace, there was a relatively secluded but exquisite two-story building next to the Imperial Garden. Sword Saint was meditating in the bedroom, seriously recovering from his injuries caused by the Four Saints formation. Outside the room, there were many top figures of the Middle Empire. Let me ask you, how long do you think it will take for the Red Disaster to arrive? The Golden King asked. Bane was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, "His actions cannot be predicted. Maybe he won't come, or maybe he'll be here soon." "Where's his real body?" Qin asked. "This, I'm not too sure." "How long will it take for Lord Sword Saint to recover?" "The Four Saints formation has been exposed. If the Red Disaster attacks again, how will we defend against it?" The Prime Minister asked. "Looking at Teacher's injuries, I'm afraid he'll need at least 10 days to half a month," Qin said. "If the Red Disaster attacks soon, there won't be enough time." The Prime Minister paced back and forth with his hands behind his back. Suddenly, he stopped and said in a deep voice, "If that's the case, then we can only ask Your Majesty to leave the palace first." "This is fine." Qin wanted to say something, but after thinking for a while, she swallowed the words she wanted to say. "Ridiculous!" The Golden King shouted, "I am the Emperor. The Empire hasn't been destroyed yet. How can I run away pathetically? You don't want your face anymore, but I still want it. Even if I don't want my face anymore, my Li family's ancestors still want it." "Your Majesty," the Prime Minister shouted anxiously. "It's not that we don't have the self-awareness of the Emperor's humiliation, but this time, the enemy's strength is unprecedented. It can't be judged by common sense." His Majesty was well aware of this point. "The situation is urgent now. You can't be unreasonable. I'm sure that even the previous emperors would understand Your Majesty's situation in the underworld. After all, protecting the peace of the Empire is Your Majesty's true filial piety." "I don't care what you say. I am the Emperor. I will stay in the Imperial Palace. I will not go anywhere. Is there a safer place in the world than the imperial palace? The Golden King roared. Sigh. The Prime Minister sighed and wiped the sweat on his forehead with his wide sleeve. Taking advantage of the moment when his sleeve covered his face, he gave Qianlong a look. Qianlong noticed the Prime Minister's signal and immediately widened her eyes in shock. Marshal Qin, who had always been straightforward and decisive on the battlefield, seemed to be hesitating at this moment. When Prime Minister Zhuge saw that Qianlong didn't move, he didn't bother to hide it anymore. He said directly, Marshal Qin, if you don't make a decision, you'll be in trouble. As in, what do you mean? The Emperor immediately sensed that something was wrong. Without waiting for the Prime Minister to speak, an urgent voice rang out from outside the room. Reporting, Your Majesty, the Vermilion Bird Gate has been breached. What happened? The Golden King asked. Just now, a red-haired young man blasted the Vermilion Bird Gate open. Nonsense. That's the Imperial Palace. How'd he do it? Qianlong questioned. He used his fist to break it. The informant seemed to have realized that what he said was too outrageous, and his voice became softer as he spoke. The Emperor, Qianlong, and the Prime Minister all looked at each other. The Vermilion Bird Gate. Back then, even the guy Mingyue couldn't cut it open with the flowing light sword. Even the sword saint could only shout and return empty-handed. But now, someone had broken it open with his bare hands. In that case, the identity of the person who came was naturally obvious. However, everyone had some wishful thinking. The three of them looked at Bane with this wishful thinking. Bane nodded and said, It should be him. Where is that person now? Qianlong asked. He's still outside the Vermilion Bird Gate, the guard replied. He didn't come in? Qianlong didn't believe that the guards could stop the red disaster. Yes, he's outside the Vermilion Bird Gate. He's waiting for someone to go out and meet him, the guard said. Arrogant to the extreme. The Golden King stood up and said angrily. Ever since the late emperor passed away, it had always been others who came to meet him. Even when he went to meet others, the situation wasn't like this. He was blocked at the gate. The more the emperor thought about it, the angrier he became. He wanted to go out. Your Majesty, don't be impulsive. The Prime Minister hurriedly grabbed the sleeves of the emperor's dragon robe and persuaded in a trembling voice. Marshal Qin, what are you waiting for? Qianlong fiercely gritted her teeth and knelt down with a plop. She took off her helmet and placed it beside her. She respectfully kowtowed to the emperor and cupped her fists and said, Your Majesty, this humble subject really has no other choice today. After today, if I'm still alive, I'll accept any punishment from Your Majesty. It's just that my brothers in the Jinshi army were just following orders. Your Majesty, please don't take your anger out on them. Just blame Qianlong alone. I, Qianlong, am willing to bear all the blame alone. Qianlong, what are you doing? The emperor pointed at Qianlong and asked. Marshal Qin stood up and shouted outside the house. Come in. As soon as Qianlong finished speaking, 12 black-armored soldiers came in from outside the house. Qianlong cupped her fists and said to the 12 people, I'll entrust the heavy burden of the country to you today. Please. The 12 people also cupped their fists and shouted, Grand Marshal, please don't worry. We'll definitely risk our lives. We won't let you down. Let's go. Qianlong waved her hand. 2 of them carried the emperor and walked into the house. There was an extremely secret underground passage in this small building. How dare you? The emperor looked at the prime minister and the marshal in shock. How dare you? Are you rebelling? Let me go. Where are the shadow guards? Where are the shadow guards? Protect me. Let me go. What are you doing? This is really a rebellion. Is the Jinshi army disobeying the emperor's orders? The emperor was still shouting and struggling with all his strength, but it was useless. He was still forced into the underground passage by the soldiers when the prime minister saw the emperor enter the secret passage. He sighed in relief and said to Qianlong, that was close. If we hadn't persuaded His Majesty to give the imperial jade seal to Sword Saint for safekeeping, we wouldn't have been able to control him. This is the most we can do for His Majesty's safety. Qianlong rubbed between her eyebrows. Now, it's time to meet him again in a dark corner near the small building. Big brother, His Majesty is calling for the shadow guards. Beta Sagittarii said. I heard, Ingi said. The Jinshi army has rebelled and offended His Majesty. What should we do? Big brother, as long as you say the word, I will rush out and tear them to pieces to protect His Majesty. Beta Sagittarii seemed to be impatient and said anxiously. Shadow 1 glanced at Shadow 2 indifferently, and without warning, he kicked out with his foot. Shadow 2, who had diamond-level strength, was unable to dodge this seemingly ordinary kick. He was kicked so hard that he sat on the ground. After so many years, your cultivation has improved, but your brain hasn't improved at all, he said in disappointment. You can fight, but can you blast open the Suzaku gate with your hands? Beta Sagittarii shook her head. Then don't worry about it, Ingi said. You take third brother, fourth brother, and fifth brother and follow His Majesty in secret. Don't show yourself easily. Okay, big brother, Beta Sagittarii said. But big brother, aren't you going to take care of His Majesty yourself? You guys protect His Majesty, and I will help His Majesty protect the palace, Ingi said. If His Majesty comes back in the future and finds the palace changed beyond recognition, it won't be good. How can the Emperor of the Middle Empire not have a palace to live in? Oh, Beta Sagittarii nodded. Then, big brother, can you blast open the Suzaku gate with your bare hands? He was silent for a moment. Get out. Okay, big brother. Beta Sagittarii agreed and left. His Majesty might have gone far, and he had to catch up quickly. Beta Sagittarii took 2 steps and couldn't help but turn back and say, Big brother, take care. Don't die. Get out. Okay, big brother. He looked at Beta Sagittarii's back and sighed softly. He had grown up in the palace and was a shadow guard trained by the royal family since he was young. Beta Sagittarii was picked up by him when he was a teenager on a mission outside the palace. Beta Sagittarii was an orphan who had been abandoned by his parents since he was a child. He had been fed by hundreds of families for a few years because he was a simpleton. In other words, he was what people called a fool. He rarely had a conscience, so he took him with him. He originally thought that he would just add a servant to the shadow guard to do odd jobs, but he didn't expect that Beta Sagittarii would soon show an extremely high talent for cultivation and finally reach the level 9 diamond realm. The Sword Saint commented that he had a pure heart, so his realm improved very quickly. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that time. And he was worried that Beta Sagittarii would be used by people with ulterior motives, so he took him with him almost all the time. Fortunately, Beta Sagittarii didn't talk much in front of others, so almost no one knew that he was a fool. Unknowingly, decades had passed since he took care of him, but after today, he didn't know if he would see him again. He didn't know if Beta Sagittarii would be able to live a good life after leaving him. But His Majesty should take good care of him, he thought silently. Chapter 134. Perhaps one man could hold back 10,000 men, invincible under the heavens, and the heroes were helpless. This was Qi Lin's current situation. He raised his hand and blasted away the palace gate that everyone was so proud of. Then he stood in front of the empty vermilion bird gate with his hands behind his back. Countless powerful figures of the empire gnashed their teeth as they stared at this mysterious young man. However, no one dared to take a step forward. He was invincible even in the midst of enemies. Of course, to Jilin, these humans couldn't even be considered enemies. They were just slightly larger ants. Your Excellency came from afar and knocked on the door without reason. What is the meaning of this? Qinlan shouted as she walked out of the palace. From afar, she could see the miserable state of the vermilion bird gate. One half of it was hanging on the city gate, while the other half flew into the palace. I'm not here to be a thief. I have to wait for the owner to talk to me before I can enter, right? Jilin said with a smile, clearly indicating that he was different from a certain someone. That's true. Qinlan glanced at the vermilion bird gate lying on the ground. If a thief could do what Your Excellency did, it would be quite impressive. I was careless when I knocked on the door and used a bit too much force. My apologies. Jilin nodded with a smile. It could be said that he was very hypocritical. That's enough, Qinlan said with a wave of her hand. It was just a glance and a gesture, but she seemed to have the power to command an army of thousands. "Don't bother with these hypocritical pleasantries, Red Calamity. What do you want?" "Tisk." Jilin clicked his tongue in disdain. He felt a bit helpless against the memory of humans. "I've already said it. Don't make me repeat it so many times. This is the last time. The Imperial Jade Seal, Bane, get it to me." "You can take him away," Qinlan said. "But the Imperial Jade Seal, even if we break it, we can't give it to you." "Really? Really? Even if we die, we won't regret it? Even if we die 10,000 times?" Hee hee. Jilin laughed in disdain. Humans always liked to say these empty words that they didn't understand and couldn't do. Humans who had never died yet said things like, "Even if we died 10,000 times." It was just like how humans who had short lives liked to say things like, "Even if the seas ran dry, the rocks would crumble, and the world would last forever." What are you laughing at? You've never died before. How do you know you won't regret it, even if you die 10,000 times? Qinlan fell silent. She looked at Qilin and suddenly remembered that this red-haired, young man before her was not human. No, I'm just too lazy to talk to you all of a sudden. Something. He was hanging on his fingertips. Before he died, he said the same thing. Not a single word was missing. You will never understand. He died because of a glowing rock that didn't belong to him. He said that it was glory. And this human girl in front of him was also willing to fight to the death with him because of a rock. It's just a rock. Is it worth it for you to risk your lives? Why don't humans value their lives more? Are you not afraid of death? I am, but humans will definitely die. So, it's better to die than live in dishonor. Well said. Since that's the case, then die. Don't say it too early. It's still unknown who will win. Underestimating the enemy is a military taboo. If I don't get the Imperial Jade Seal today, I will never step into the Middle Empire. It's a promise. This is the promise of the Megalosaurus. It will be integrated into my bloodline and will never be violated. Good. Qinlan shouted. Formation rise. Countless soldiers came out from their hiding places and formed the 10 heavenly soldiers, 4 saints formation again. From the moment Qinlan appeared, this place was already surrounded by layers of soldiers. 2 huge formations of light appeared once again. Same old trick, nothing new, Jilin said casually. It's not new, Qinlan said. You're at your wit's end. White Tiger formation. Qinlan began to give orders and began to attack. However, since the 4 Saints array did not have a legendary champion like the Sacred Swordsman as the array master, the power of the White Tiger could not be attached to the human body. Therefore, the White Tiger patterns on the 2 arrays leaped out of the array and attacked Qilin directly. 2 palace-sized White Tiger images waved their tiger claws that were larger than humans and slapped towards Jilin. The momentum was vast and powerful. The sharp tiger claws could easily cut through metal and stone. Jilin turned a blind eye to the terrifying White Tiger images. He didn't even look at them. He just raised his arm and placed it above his head. It was as if a mountain ridge was erected above his head. He looked down at the howling wind with contempt. I will not move and let the wind come from all directions. Sure enough, after the terrifying tiger claws smashed into Jilin's arm, they stopped. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't sink down even a little bit. Jilin kept his other hand at his waist. He took a step forward and punched out. It was an ordinary punch, but the 2 White Tiger images in front of him were instantly shattered. They turned into a spectacular light and scattered in all directions. The soldiers in charge of the formation instantly turned pale. Just as Jilin was about to pull back his fist, a cold and sharp sword light flashed in the air beside him. The Sword Saint used all his strength to slash at Jilin's arm. Kacha! It was the sound of metal breaking. The Sword Saint appeared not far away from Jilin. His white robe fluttered in the wind. He looked like a celestial being in a painting aloof from the world. However, the broken sword in his hand and his face, which was even paler than Bai Yi's, ruined this image. We meet again, Jilin said. Your sword this time is not as good as the last time. The Sword Saint looked at Jilin's arm that was covered with red scales. He cursed under his breath. Then he said to Jilin, "There's no difference. Even if the flowing light sword is here, it can't do anything to you." "Teacher, why are you?" Qinlan saw the sword saint suddenly appear. She was shocked and said anxiously. The sword saint raised his hand and interrupted Qinlan. He looked at Jilin and said, "Do you know why I dare to fight you head-on, even though I know I am not your match?" Jilin frowned. He thought to himself, why do humans like to talk about these things? He pondered for a moment and said, what is it about responsibility and glory? The sword saint was stunned. He did not expect a megalosaurus that had killed countless people to be able to say such things. "No, I just feel that I can defeat you in this place." Jilin's eyes narrowed. "You overestimate yourself. You are a frog in a well. Then you should take a good look." The sword saint held his sword and shouted. He then began to recite quickly. The white tiger of the west responds to the constellation of sages. Heroic qualities. Solemn and clear voice. Intimidate beasts. Roar through the mountains and forests. Come on my left. Following the sword saint's sacred recitation, the extremely sharp power of the white tiger once again descended upon him. You are heavily injured. Using divine power again is not a wise decision. You may not be able to withstand the backlash. You will die. Jilin looked at the sword saint who was glowing with golden light. He said coldly, "And you should know that this little bit of divine power is insignificant to me." "Of course I know." The sword saint was panting heavily as he spoke. It was obvious that the divine power had put a heavy burden on him. "Then how about I add another one?" After the sword saint finished speaking, a slightly gloomy and ethereal voice sounded from the north of the Four Saints formation. The black tortoise of the north, born from the moon, dangerous on the surface, shaped like a tortoise snake, roaming the nine lands, dominating all living things. Come to my right. The legendary combatant, Ing Yi, had invited the northern god, the power of the black tortoise. Jilin looked at Ing Yi, who was glowing with a black light. He was not surprised at all, only disdain. He had noticed this person the moment he entered the palace. Compared to the other humans, this person was too conspicuous in his eyes. "One ant, two ants, what difference does it make to you?" Jilin looked at the sword saint and said. There was no hint of mockery in his tone, because to him, he was just stating a fact. The sword saint did not mind at all. He already knew Jilin's attitude towards humans. He took out a crystal-clear emerald seal and said to Jilin, "Look at this." Jilin frowned and looked at it for a while, then shook his head. "You don't even know what the Imperial Jade Seal looks like, and you want it?" The sword saint said in disbelief. "This is the Imperial Jade Seal." Jilin raised his eyebrows and smiled. He took a step forward, and as if he had teleported, he instantly appeared in front of the sword saint. His hand formed a claw and grabbed at the sword saint. Compared to the sword saint's sword, it was even faster. Chapter 135. No one knew why the Imperial Jade Seal, the symbol of imperial power, would appear in Sword Saint's hands. It was not carried by the Emperor or the Emperor's personal eunuch. What was even more puzzling was why Sword Saint would take it out so openly in front of the Red Disaster. Jilin believed that he would not be able to figure out something that even the complicated minds of humans could not figure out, so he did not think about it at all and chose to take it directly. Just as Jilin's fingertips were about to touch Sword Saint, a solid black light shield suddenly appeared in front of Sword Saint. This light shield was like a turtle shell that had been magnified countless times. The Four Saints formation that was set up by tens of thousands of people, in addition to the leadership of a legendary master, was something that the Middle Empire used as a trump card. Of course, it was not to be underestimated. This turtle shell shield, formed by the power of the black tortoise, could actually block Jilin's grab. But in the next moment, this light shield was hit by Jilin into specks of light that filled the sky. Countless black specks of light floated in the sky like black snow. Although the power of the black tortoise only blocked Jilin for a moment, it was enough. Sword Saint seized this fleeting opportunity. He threw the Imperial Jade Seal like an arc of light towards the center of the Four Saints formation. He took out the Imperial Jade Seal not to show it to Jilin. On the transparent imperial jade seal, there was a dragon carved by a skilled craftsman. Yellow dragon. The 5 elemental sacred beasts, the yellow dragon belonged to the earth element. It was located in the center and was the leader of the 4 saints. As the imperial jade seal fell into the formation, the image of the yellow dragon appeared in the middle of the 4 saint beasts. At this point, the 10 Directions Celestial Soldiers 4 Saints formation was truly completed. Jilin felt the changes in the formation. Originally, he was always restrained in this formation, but now the strength seemed to have increased a little. Although the effect was still not great, "It's useless," Jilin said. He moved his arms and was ready to dismantle the formation to find the Imperial Jade Seal. "Not necessarily," Sword Saint said. "Have you heard of the Chinquin formation?" Jilin was shocked. Of course he had heard of the Great Cosmos Array. Wasn't he looking for the Imperial Jade Seal because he wanted to enter the Heaven and Earth Great Array to obtain the God Spirit? The 10 Directions Celestial Soldiers 4 Saint formation is the pivot of the Great Cosmos formation. Only by fully activating the 4 Saints formation could he activate the Great Cosmos formation. Next, you will experience the 1,000-year-old foundation of the Middle Empire. What? Do you think this formation can defeat me? Or kill me? No. I've never thought of it that way. However, this Great Cosmos formation should be able to trap you for a few years. Human, aren't you being too arrogant? Wishful thinking. What a pity. Red Calamity, be quiet for a few years. When you reappear in the sky again, perhaps the times have changed. I've said it before, you're just wishful thinking. Jilin was already a little angry. He originally admired this human in front of him. Formation rise. Sword Saint raised his hand and formed a sword seal. Golden light shone from his body. The 2 4 Saint formation diagrams slowly closed together and finally merged into one, sitting on the ground. Golden energy spread out from the 4 Saints formation like water, flowing through the Vermilion Bird Street and into the Imperial Lake in the Imperial Garden. Then, it flowed through every street and alley in the capital city, every river and lake. Thus, the Great Cosmos formation with the entire capital city as the formation diagram was completed. Jilin, who was in the middle of the formation, suddenly bent down. He only felt that there were countless weights on his body, countless mountains. Even he was caught off guard and almost couldn't hold on. Jilin, who was forced to lower his head, suddenly felt incomparable anger. The golden light in his eyes became incomparably bright. Even the sun in the sky was covered by him for a moment. Red scales appeared all over his body, and his body began to expand. Everyone was shocked to see a megalosaurus appear out of thin air. Jilin, who had recovered his true form, was surprised to find that he still couldn't move. Even his wings couldn't be raised, because the weight on his body was too shocking. What was Cosmos? It was heaven and earth a world. Right now, the weight of small world was firmly pressing down on Jilin's body. Even if you could move mountains fly into the sky and crack the earth when a world was pressing down on your body, you would definitely be unable to move. The Great Cosmos formation was originally a world, or it could be said that it was the entrance to another world. It was the true meaning of the existence of the Middle Empire. Just like the Nanshin Empire's responsibility was to resist the beastmen in the southern wasteland, the Saimai Empire's responsibility was to guard against the monsters in the volcanoes. The Divine Dragon Empire's responsibility was to resist the water race in the endless sea. And the Snow Wind Empire's responsibility was to guard against the demon race that only existed in legends and had never been seen before. Then, the Middle Empire's responsibility was to protect the world on the other side of the Great Cosmos formation. Jilin struggled with all his might, but even if he collapsed the ground, he couldn't get up. Humans, you can't keep suppressing me. How much of a burden is this formation to humans? How long can you maintain it? Jilin's mouth didn't move, but his voice still sounded. Of course, I don't need you to remind me. Sword Saint raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His originally white sleeves were stained with blood, making him look even more miserable. because we won't be able to hold on for much longer. Jilin snorted and said angrily, "Since that's the case, I'll help you free yourselves." Then, a language that had never been spoken before sounded. It was filled with a sacred rhythm and the most primitive wildness. This was the Draconic language. Jilin activated the Draconic language spell, End of Fire. He wanted to directly burn this great cosmos formation, just like how he burned the Holy Light formation in Shengming City back then. There's no need. Sword Saint couldn't stand anymore. He swayed and sat on the ground. Go to that world and stay there for a few years. Humans need to prepare. When you come out, we'll give you a surprise. Just as Sword Saint was speaking, a golden circle of light opened up under Jilin's body. The circle of light was so huge that it enveloped Jilin's entire body. Jilin, who had always brought Aisha with him, was all too familiar with this thing. This was the entrance to the teleportation formation. Jilin began to slowly sink, and on the other side of the entrance was an unknown world. It won't end like this, human. Jilin's golden eyes stared fixedly at Sword Saint. His draconic aura surged like a tidal wave. I think so too. If it wasn't for the great cosmos formation in the middle and Sword Saint's many years of cultivation, he probably wouldn't have been able to say a single word in front of Jilin's majestic aura. That's why we'll be prepared. Just wait and see. The victor is still unknown. Don't underestimate humans. Humans have defeated countless enemies stronger than humans. You will eventually be defeated by humans. This is our world. That's right. This is your world, but it's not only yours. Jilin said, in this world, there are many races other than humans, but you humans have never taken them seriously. Just like how you view humans? Sword Saint smiled weakly. If you were a little more serious and valued humans, we wouldn't be in this situation now. I'll let you be proud for now. Jilin's voice was so cold that it made people shudder. I'll return one day. When that time comes, my flames will burn in this world. An army as large as the sand in the sea will launch an unprecedented attack on humans. The world of humans will be destroyed. Prepare to pay the price for what you've done, human. As Jilin spoke, he finally completely sank into another world. Sword Saint could no longer hold on. He suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood that he had been suppressing for a long time. Using his hand to cover his chest, he violently gasped for breath. Then his eyes rolled back, and he directly fainted. As for the other legend rank expert, Ing Yi, when Jilin shattered the tortoiseshell shield, he had already lost consciousness. The two legend rank experts who were in charge of the formation had already fainted. The tens of thousands of soldiers were also trembling and gasping for breath. The great cosmos formation and the 10 celestial soldiers, 4 saints formation, melted like snow, quietly dissipating. It was as if they never existed. Only the devastation in the capital seemed to be telling people something. Chapter 136. In the outskirts of the capital, there was a famous Yuchuan mountain. Yuchuan Mountain was originally called Yuchuan Mountain. It was not tall, and there was nothing special about it. The reason why it was famous was because there was a spiritual spring on the mountain. The spring water was rich in spiritual energy, and it tasted sweet and clear. It was a real treasure. Until the royal family of the Middle Empire took a fancy to this spring, this Yuchuan Mountain was renamed Yuchuan Mountain and became even more famous. Every move of the royal family could easily attract the attention of everyone in the world. Therefore, Aisha, who had been traveling around the world in her early years, knew that there was a spiritual spring with good quality here. She also knew that in the depths of this mountain, there was a cave that was used by an expert to live in seclusion. It was hidden in the dense forest without anyone knowing. Aisha and Staya, who had been sleeping all this time, were hiding in this cave. This was the place that she had agreed to meet Jilin. Suddenly, there was an undisguised sound of footsteps outside the cave. Hearing this sound, the owner of the footsteps must have mercilessly stepped on the countless dead leaves on the ground. Aisha did not even look outside, because she was sure that the person who came was Jilin. She had set up a camouflage spell outside the cave. Even if the Pope came personally, he would not be able to pass through it so easily without alerting her. She was confident about this. There were only two people who could pass through this spell so easily. One was Jilin, and the other was Bane. If the person who came was Bane, then Xiaohei, who was keeping watch outside the cave, would have to call out and greet him. But now, other than the sound of footsteps outside the cave, there was only dead silence. Xiaohei probably did not even dare to move, let alone call out. This place is not bad. The person entered the cave and looked around, nodded, and said with satisfaction. After all, this was a place where an expert lived in seclusion. Although it was a little simple, it had all the essentials. It did not lose the word elegant. Aisha then looked towards the entrance of the cave. As expected, a head of eye-catching red hair came into view. Why didn't you go straight to the palace? Why are you in such a hurry to come here? Aisha asked curiously. Have you already been there? It's on its way. This is a clone, Jilin said. Another clone? Why do you like to use clones so much? Aisha frowned slightly. I heard that the ability to create doppelgangers cannot be used for a long time. Otherwise, there will be serious consequences. No matter how good a person is at it, his doppelganger cannot exist for more than half a quarter of an hour. This skill is convenient, Jilin said. It's all right. The dragon race's brain is different from that of humans. I can barely use two bodies at the same time, and the doppelganger I create is not a true doppelganger of a human. It's more like a puppet, so it's not a big deal. Aisha saw that Jilin had said so she didn't say anything more. After all, Megalosaurus and humans were fundamentally different in structure. It was indeed impossible to use human thinking to figure it out. Then why did you create another clone this time? Hold back. Hold back. I didn't expect you to have a guilty conscience one day. It can't be helped. That human with the sword obviously dug a hole for me to jump into. It seems that he really has the confidence to deal with me. I can't think of any way he can do it. I'm not confident, so I can only hold back. According to what you said, it's better to be prepared. Hee hee. Aisha couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. Then, can't he be bluffing? It doesn't make sense. Jilin shook his head. If he's bluffing, then there are only two possibilities. Either he's really looking for death, or he's crazy. I don't think he's crazy. As for looking for death, why would he bring so many people to die with him? Aisha listened to Jilin's words and didn't say anything. She just looked at Jilin silently for a long time. It was so long that even Jilin felt a little strange. What's the matter? Jilin asked. Nothing. I just feel that compared to the first time we met, you've changed a lot. Have I? Yes. What? Maybe you haven't noticed it yourself, but you've started to think like a human. You've become more like a human. Are you scolding me? No. Aisha smiled faintly and shook her head. Since you're not confident and you know it's a trap, why don't you just not go or not give him a chance to use it? If anyone dares to show up, just kill them. With your strength, even the Sword Saint can't react in time. How can I do that? As a noble member of the dragon race, I have to give him a chance to struggle no matter what. You really made her change a lot. Aisha glanced at Staya, who was lying on the bed and sighed. She now regretted letting Jilin catch Staya. I want to tell you something. In the countless stories about the Megalosaurus was almost always killed by the hero for this reason. Is that so? Jilin frowned and thought for a moment. The stories his father told him made sense. So he said to Aisha, Okay, when I see the real hero, I'll kill him right from the start. Speaking of the hero, Jilin subconsciously glanced at Staya. Why is she still sleeping? Did I hit her too hard? No, you weren't here, so I didn't dare to wake her up. Should I wake her up now? Yes. After being silent for a short while, Jilin nodded. Let her sleep for a while longer. It's almost finished over there. It seems that the one with the sword has already used his last means. It's a bit interesting to see large formations and small formations. It's the Qian array. Aisha stood up and exclaimed, You're in the array? Jilin nodded. Why are you in the array? The Four Saints array shouldn't be able to trap you. Before the Qian array is completed, you can leave the array. I didn't even want to hide. Aisha covered her forehead. How do you feel now? Not so good. I can't move now. This array is really powerful. It's okay, I'll burn it. What's wrong? Well, a teleportation array suddenly appeared under me. It seems like it's too late, Jilin said with a smile. Aisha didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. She just put both hands on her face and rubbed it a few times. Then she looked at Jilin. I was careless. Jilin said, No, you weren't careless. Aisha shook her head and patted Jilin's shoulder. In human terms, if a tiger loses to a leopard, you can say that it was careless. But if a bear lost to a rabbit, it would be a miracle. You can only say that it succeeded in courting death. Ha. Jilin laughed dryly and looked at Aisha. If it wasn't for the oath I made, I would have stabbed you to death with one hand. Then where are you now? Aisha stopped joking and asked seriously. This is another world. Jilin's expression instantly turned solemn. What's in that world? Is there anyone? Jilin was silent for a moment and slowly shook his head. One could imagine that while he was silent, his real body had already flown far away from that world. However, he said that there were no humans. What's there? Yellow sand, wind, earth walls, weathered buildings, wreckage. Wreckage? What wreckage? There are all kinds of things. Humans, dwarves, beasts, all of them. There are also things that I haven't seen before. Those are dragon skeletons. They're my ancestors. I didn't expect that there would be dragon skeletons left outside. This is a battlefield as big as the world. I saw it. Those are the humanoid weapons used by the Snow Wind Empire. They are called Snow God Weapon. That's right, but they are all broken. They are densely packed and everywhere. They are like weeds. They cover the entire land. One of those things is already very scary. So many of them. What kind of battlefield is this? There's life in this world, Jilin suddenly exclaimed. That seems to be what? Seems to be God. Thank you, friend, for the recommendation tickets. The author thanks here. Chapter 137. God, Aisha exclaimed. How do you know it's a god? Have you seen a god? I haven't, but I know that it's definitely a god. How can you be so sure? Because the instinct in my blood tells me so, Jilin said seriously. Aisha couldn't help but roll her eyes. Why are you talking about instinct at such a crucial moment? If instinct could be relied on, then this world would be too beautiful. Jilin glanced at Aisha. From Aisha's expression, he could almost guess what Aisha was thinking. That's right. How could a complete realist like Aisha be convinced by such idealistic things? The dragon race is different from humans. Most of the knowledge that the dragon race can be passed down to the next generation directly through the bloodline, saving the time needed to learn. Therefore, the so-called instinct in the blood of the dragon race is the knowledge that was passed down to us by our parents, Jilin said. Oh, Aisha nodded and agreed with Jilin's explanation. But according to your description, this world should be an abandoned world. It should be a broken world after the war. There's no life here. If that's the case, why would a god be here? Shouldn't a god live in the majestic heavens? I don't know if the heavens are majestic or not. My parents have never been there, Jilin said. As for why there's a god here, I don't know either. But it's okay. What are you going to do? Aisha suddenly had a bad idea and asked hurriedly. Do you even need to ask? I'm going to take the god's soul, Jilin said. According to Staya, this is what it means to travel far and wide in search of something, only to find it without any effort. I didn't expect the humans to send the god's soul to me. Wait a minute, Aisha shouted. First of all, this wasn't said by Staya. It was said by the ancestors of the Middle Empire. Secondly, how are you going to take the god's soul? What else can we do? Jilin tilted his head and looked at Aisha. He felt that Aisha was much more silly than usual today. Aisha calmed down and thought about it. She realized that Jilin's idea was right. Not only was it correct, but it was also impeccable. It was a barren world. With Jilin's flying speed and detection range, he had not found any living creatures after flying for such a long time. That could only mean that there were no living creatures in this world. The entire world might only have Jilin and a god that could not be considered creature. In this situation, there was indeed no other way to deal with them, so they could only attack directly. Are you confident? Aisha asked. Jilin didn't say anything. He just shook his head gently. After all, that was a god. How about I teach you a few spells? You want to test the waters first? With your talent, I'm sure you'll be able to understand it after watching it once. Jilin rolled his eyes at Aisha and shook his head again. It wasn't that he couldn't use Aisha's spells, but the cost was a little high in another world. The incomparably huge Jilin flapped his wings and landed on a mountaintop. For the first time in his life, he looked at something so seriously. That was a god. Jilin only took one look, and he was very sure, because that thing was as tall as a mountain and was round and round. Its entire body was made of some unknown material. It looked like yellow water. Through divine power, he could see clearly from one side to the other. However, Jilin could clearly feel the hardness of this thing. It was like an incomparably round and huge topaz. Based on human proportions, this thing's legs were extremely short, but its arms were very long. It didn't have a head, so naturally, it didn't have a face or any facial features. There was only a glowing thing shining in its body. In Jilin's knowledge, among all the things that could look so carefree, only gods, because gods weren't living beings, they were a kind of rule, a kind of concept. They could change their appearance at will. They could be majestic and sacred, like all human guesses, but they could also be incomparably absurd and beyond everyone's imagination. That was why the Black Dragon King, the king of the dragon race, could steal a pair of wings from Lucifer and press it on his body. Gods had thousands of appearances. All of them were him, and all of them weren't. Jilin stuck out his tongue and licked his face. He stared at that shining thing. That must be the god's soul. He had been staring at that god for a long time. He didn't understand why this god didn't react to his prying. Jilin shook his head. He didn't want to think about things that he couldn't figure out. He suddenly took a deep breath, and a strange wind blew in this world. Jilin's eyes shone with golden light. The sky that was originally covered by yellow sand began to gradually turn red. This was a sign that the number of fire elementals was rapidly increasing. Dragon's breath. Jilin spat out an incomparably huge dragon's breath. Even he himself seemed a little small in front of this dragon's breath. He used the most powerful attack of the dragon race as soon as he attacked. After all, the other party was a god. He still had to give him the respect he deserved. A gully that was almost 100 meters deep instantly appeared on the ground in front of him. The wind and sand that filled the sky were also torn apart. It was as if the sky had been torn open with a thin and long hole. The two mountains that were hundreds of meters tall in front of the god also disappeared in an instant. The all-out red disaster indeed had the ability to destroy heaven and earth. It lived up to its name of disaster. The dragon's breath enveloped that god in an instant. That god didn't seem to notice at all and didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. Jilin's eyes suddenly narrowed. He didn't think that one dragon's breath could kill a god. The dragon's breath slowly dissipated. The earth and sky had changed their appearances. Only the god was still standing in his original position. Even his posture hadn't changed, except for the green smoke that kept coming out of his body and a few more inconspicuous cracks. The god finally turned around toward Jilin and began to run toward Jilin. Its short legs supported such a huge body as it ran. It looked really funny, but the power it gave off when it ran was enough to stop any creature from laughing. Every step it took shook the earth and the mountains. Its arms were too long, and the range of its swinging was too large. It accidentally touched a mountain in the distance, and the mountain began to rumble and collapse. Jilin looked at the god. Before this, he had always thought that toppling the mountains and overturning the seas was just a slightly exaggerated adjective that humans had imagined. Jilin collected his thoughts, pulled himself together, and began to roar at the sky. The entire space was shaken by his voice. Jilin's huge body began to expand again. It didn't stop until it was about the same size as the god. There was a loud rumbling sound. The mountain under him couldn't bear his current weight and was crushed by him. Jilin flapped his wings, got up from the ground lightly, and rushed toward the god. Like lightning, a claw that couldn't be seen clearly grabbed the god's body. There was a loud sound of metal clashing. The earth under the god's feet shattered. After being grabbed by Jilin, the god didn't seem to feel anything. It still waved its arms and smashed toward Jilin. It had a feeling of you hit yours, I'll hit mine. Jilin didn't want to take the hit. He covered his body with his wings. The small scales on his wings were all tightly connected together, turning the originally soft wings into a hard shield. Like a meteorite hitting the earth, the god's fist hit Jilin's wings. Jilin was actually sent flying by the attack. As he tumbled, he crashed into 3 mountain peaks along the way. Jilin flapped his wings and swept away countless gravel. He got up and rushed up again. Similarly, the earth and mountains shook. Jilin saw the opportunity and dodged the god's fist. He opened his mouth and bit the god's arm. The dragon was a creature with fangs. The most powerful part of its attack was its fangs. Jilin bit down and felt that his teeth were a little numb. As for the god's arm, other than a few shallow teeth marks, there didn't seem to be any change. The god punched again. Aisha kept staring at Jilin. Since he stopped talking, Jilin's face began to flicker. Occasionally, some flames would burst out from his body. This was a sign that Jilin's control over this doppelganger was declining. After a long time, Jilin slowly opened his golden eyes and said thoughtfully, "That's not a real god." "Then what is it?" "That's just the god's body. That body has no thoughts." "You want?" "No." "Then you—" "I can't hit it. I can't bite it. There's nothing I can do. I can only run." "How did you run?" In Aisha's opinion, it was a great thing to be able to escape unscathed after fighting with the god. "He didn't chase me at all. I said it's just a body without thoughts." "Then what should we do now?" "I have an idea. Let's go to the wilderness first." "What about Bane?" "He's fine. Let's ignore him for now." "Okay, I think it's okay." Chapter 138. In the Imperial Garden of the Middle Empire's Imperial Palace, there was a man-made waterfall called Jade Waterfall. The water was so clear that one could see the bottom. Naturally, there was a pool at the bottom of the Jade Waterfall. In the pool, there were dozens of rocks the size of a human head. They looked like they were scattered all over the place, giving off a sense of elegance. Everywhere, one could see the craftsmanship of the craftsman. However, when the sword sage was still in the palace in his early years, he often played with Prince Li Zheng and Kameshi Waterfall. At that time, the sword saint looked at the Jade Waterfall for a long time. When he didn't see the complacent Li Zheng, he frowned slightly and said, "Not good." From then on, Li Zheng suffered a great blow and never came to admire the Jade Waterfall again. In the Imperial Palace, a place that the Emperor would never go would naturally not attract the attention of others, no matter how beautiful the scenery of this piece of land was. Therefore, the Jade Waterfall became one of the few desolate places in the Imperial Palace. There were very few people. Until a week ago, when the Sword Saint recovered from the injuries he suffered in the Great Battle. The Sword Saint brought a foreigner here every day to practice his swordsmanship. The white snake flicks its tongue, the wild horse parts its mane, the ancestor guides the way, the black dragon circles the pillar. The white-robed Sword Saint sat cross-legged on a rock in the pool. Naturally, he was reciting sword moves one by one. Bane held a sword and stood on one of the protruding rocks in the pool. His body nimbly moved back and forth. Every time the Sword Saint recited a move, Bane would follow suit. The Sword Saint nodded in his heart. In his opinion, although this young man's talent was not very good, it could be considered above average. But the most important thing was that this child's foundation was very solid. He could be considered a good material. The rocks in the pool had been washed by the water for many years. They had become very round and covered in moss. For ordinary people, it was already extremely difficult for them to stand steadily on the surface without falling into the water. Moreover, Bane had to perform the sword moves that he had just learned, plop. Just as the Sword Saint was secretly satisfied with Bane, Bane suddenly fell into the water, creating a big splash. The Sword Saint formed a sword seal with 2 fingers, and the water droplets that were flying towards him instantly stopped in midair and fell back into the pool. "Since you've already fallen into the water, quickly come up," Sword Saint said. Bane came ashore and lay on the ground in a sorry state, panting heavily. The practice just now had consumed a lot of his mind. Practicing swordsmanship on a slippery rock without falling into the water, the pressure was no less than walking on a tightrope in the air. Lord Sword Saint, is the sword technique I've been practicing the bright moon sword technique that made you famous? It is indeed profound and exquisite. Even though Bane was extremely tired, he still did not forget to flatter the Sword Saint. The Sword Saint smiled faintly. It had been a long time since he was so carelessly flattered. He coughed lightly and said, "No. No what?" Bane did not react for a moment. "What you're practicing now is the Taiji sword technique." Sword Saint said, "Taiji sword technique." Bane's face was blank, indicating that he had never heard of it. This is a sword technique that was widely spread in the Middle Empire. I don't know where it came from, but it is profound and has a long history. In the Middle Empire, every swordsman had to learn this sword technique as a basic skill. Sword Saint said, just like in the Sami Empire, every child had to read the Book of Light before they could learn to read. Bane was silent for a moment. He thought for a moment and said, "Then if I practice this sword technique, can I exchange 2 blows with Jilin?" "No," Sword Saint said calmly. "You know best, don't you? Let's not talk about you practicing this sword technique. Even if you can learn everything I've learned in my life and surpass me, you won't be able to exchange 2 blows with him, unless he stands still and allows you to hit him. Then what's the point of asking me to practice this sword technique?" Bane said, "Let me say this first. I will definitely not make him my enemy, because that would be suicide. Even if he..." Bane felt that he could not continue halfway through his sentence. He thought to himself, if Jilin really massacred humans for no reason in the future, then no way. Jilin would never do that. Humans were not worth it for him to do that. Who would squat beside an ant's nest and not do anything else but stare at the ants and kill them as soon as they come out? If that's so boring, wouldn't it be better to take a nap? Sword Saint saw the struggle in Bane's heart and said softly, "But do a good thing. Don't ask about the future. You want me to be a hidden arrow behind Jilin's back?" At the crucial moment, Bane said. Sword Saint raised his hand and stopped Bane from continuing. "It's not as complicated as you think, and it's not as dark. But it's not your fault. You've been by that witch's side for too long. It's inevitable that some darkness is stuck in your heart. Then what do you want me to do? I just want to give you some strength so that you can do what you want to do at certain times. Although it may be insignificant, at least you won't blame yourself for being weak. Why are you teaching me? It's just convenient." "Lord Sword Saint, is this world really not as dark as Sister Aisha said?" Sword Saint's body that was sitting cross-legged on the rock swayed unnoticeably. "People always say that the world is sinister, but the real reason for this is that people are never afraid to use the most sinister intentions to speculate about others and claim to be smart." "You mean the appearance is born from the heart?" "That's right. I understand now. Then what should I do now?" "Practice your sword." "Yes." Bane stood up and picked up his sword. He stepped onto the rock in the pool and began practicing his sword again. In his heart, he recited the sword moves from before. The white snake spits out its tongue. The wild horse parts its mane. The ancestor guides the way. Similarly, a figure dressed in white silently walked to Sword Saint's side and watched Bane practice his sword. This person was clearly standing by the pool, but Bane did not seem to see this person. Sword Saint turned his head to look at the person. The luxurious white robe was embroidered with precious gold, but the handsome face of a young man had a head of white hair. This might be the first time the Pope of the Church of Light had appeared in the palace of the Middle Empire. "Why are you here?" Sword Saint asked curiously. "Is the Pope here to preach in the Middle Empire?" The Pope shook his head and smiled. The phrase standing tall and smiling like the moon in one's bosom could be used to describe a person like the Pope. "We have already given up on preaching in the Middle Empire 5 generations ago," the Pope said helplessly. "You people of the Middle Empire don't believe in God. You believe? Everyone else thinks that I do. Are you the best fighter in the Church of Light?" Sword Saint was silent for a moment and asked seriously. The Pope raised his head and thought for a moment before saying, "More or less. No wonder you can become the Pope. Why is this young man here?" The Pope didn't want to say anything more about how he became the Pope, so he abruptly changed the topic. He recognized Bane at a glance. Him? He came to help the Red Calamity steal the Imperial Jade Seal, and I caught him. Oh, so brave at such a young age. The Pope praised exaggeratedly. Then why are you still teaching him swordsmanship? He is one of the Red Calamity's people. Sword Saint said. Gray line of the grass snake, lurking for 1,000 miles? The Pope looked at Sword Saint and said, Isn't this foreshadowing of yours a little too long? And even if it succeeds, it won't be of much use. Sword Saint didn't say anything, but he sighed to himself. He thought to himself, birds of a feather flock together. He had heard a lot about the Pope and Aisha, and there were no secrets in this world for legendary figures. After this is over, if you are still alive, you might as well join the witches. You are quite suitable. Sword Saint said, I want to. The Pope shouted and said regretfully, When I first met Aisha when I was young, I thought about this, but I didn't expect that her organization didn't want men. Those bastards. No wonder we destroyed them. They deserved it. Even Sword Saint didn't expect the Pope to say such a thing, and looked at the Pope in shock. You're the Pope of the Church of Light, yet you have thought of joining the enemy. Could this be the legendary, ask the world what love is, and let people live and die for it? No. The Pope seemed to have realized something, and stared at Sword Saint and said, Why am I the one going there? Shouldn't she be the one to join the Church of Light? Sword Saint looked at the Pope and didn't say anything for a long time. He thought to himself, You two better not bring trouble to the Church of Light. Finally, Sword Saint calmed down, took a deep breath, and brought the topic back to the beginning. Why are you here? You don't know? The Pope looked at Sword Saint in disbelief. Tell me. Sword Saint's face darkened, and a burst of sharp sword energy burst out in all directions. Even the jade waterfall was cut in half. Water drawing sword. Plop. Bane fell into the water again. Just 2 weeks ago, the Golden King said that the Middle Empire had controlled the Red Disaster, and hurriedly called for the second conference of the kings. The time is today. I am here to accompany the wise king to the meeting. The Pope said, Chapter 139. You really don't know anything about such a huge matter? The Pope frowned and looked at Sword Saint in confusion. With Sword Saint's status in the Middle Empire, there shouldn't be anything that could get past him, let alone something like this. I haven't been in the palace for many years, so I don't have anyone in the palace, Sword Saint calmly replied. So that's how it is? The Pope rubbed his chin and nodded as if he understood something. It's not like that. Bane, who had fallen into the water, once again climbed out of the pool and spoke with difficulty. It was when you were unconscious that the royal doctor checked your wounds and told the Golden King that you needed to rest. So the Golden King ordered that no one was to disturb you. Unconscious? The Pope looked at Sword Saint. To be able to temporarily trap the Red Calamity and pay such a small price is already very fortunate. It's already good enough that you didn't die, Sword Saint replied. Huh, that's true. The Pope thought for a bit and sighed. But where exactly did this young man come from? First, he caught the Red Calamity's attention and was kept by its side for so long. Then he was given an important task and sent to steal the Imperial Seal. And now you're personally teaching him swordsmanship. This brat's fortuitous encounter was truly blessed by the heavens. Could it be that he really is some kind of fine jade, and I can't see it? The Pope looked at Bane, who was lying on the shore, and spoke to Sword Saint through voice transmission. He's just a gentle and kind young man, Sword Saint smiled faintly. In terms of talent, I can only say that he has a solid foundation. Ugh. The Pope had a disgusted expression and spoke to Sword Saint in disdain. Who are you trying to fool? Gentle and kind. That's what I say when I'm trying to fool people. Hurry up. What's so special about this young man? Why do you think so highly of him? Sword Saint looked at the Pope and felt that it was ridiculous. It was normal for people to not believe in gentle and kind, as gentle and kind people would often have a hard life, because this world was neither gentle nor kind. However, Sword Saint did not expect that even the Pope of the Church of Light would not believe him. What are you standing there for? Speak. The Pope poked Sword Saint's shoulder. Sword Saint immediately snapped out of his daze. He frowned and looked at the Pope impatiently. Because this kid just said that Aisha is his sister. The Pope was stunned. His eyes suddenly widened. He blurted out to Sword Saint, "That's impossible." Sword Saint did not expect the Pope to have such a big reaction. He was quite surprised. Why not? Aisha's brother has been dead for many years. It's because... The Pope looked at Baines seriously and stopped abruptly midway through his sentence. He could clearly see that this young man was at most 20 years old. It was impossible for him to be Aisha's brother. That which has a younger brother? Just pretend I didn't say anything. The Pope's words were resolute and decisive. It was only now that his aura showed a trace of what a Pope should look like, although the content of his words was still so rascally. Middle Empire, Temple of Kings. Compared to the Simi Empire's Temple of Kings, which was pure white and occasionally embellished with gold, the Middle Empire's Temple of Kings was much more extravagant. Using large amounts of gold as decorations in a tacky manner, the entire King's Temple was decorated in a dazzling golden light. It was magnificent and extravagant to the extreme. It was perfectly in line with the characteristics of the people of the Middle Empire. In front of outsiders, no matter what you do, you have to make sure you have enough face first. You can't let others look down on you, no one. That's the situation. The Golden King leaned on the table and said to the other 4 emperors. Just now, he had described in detail the series of events that had happened in the Middle Empire over the past few days, from Bane coming to steal the Imperial Jade Seal, to Jilin's clone coming to ask for people, to using the Great Shinkoan Formation to trap Jilin. Then according to what you said, isn't this Red Calamity already solved? The War King, who had the most direct temper, was the first to speak. No matter how strong he is, can he fly from one world to another? That's not necessarily true. The Hero King said, "There's a legend in the Divine Dragon Empire that the king of the dragon race, the Black Dragon King, passed through the boundary from hell and came to the human world. He brought out black smoke from hell and spread it all over the human world. From then on, the human world had sin, sickness, and death. That's a little too mysterious." The Golden King said with a frown. The Middle Empire's tradition of not believing in gods had emerged again. "No, there are similar records in the Holy Book of Light," the Sacred King said. "Besides, don't you also think that it can't contain the Red Calamity? Otherwise, why would you convene the Temple of Kings again?" "You're right," the Golden King said. "I also think that the Great Universal Formation can't hold the Red Calamity for more than a few years. That's why I called everyone here. I hope that everyone can use this time to make more preparations." What exactly is the small world connected to the Great Universal Formation? How did the Middle Empire control it? The War King asked the question that everyone present was very curious about. The Golden King suddenly lowered his head and remained silent. "Golden King, there's no point in hiding it at a time like this," the War King said with a frown. "No." The Golden King thought for a long time before he finally refused. "This is a top secret of the Middle Empire. It's the foundation of the Empire, and it definitely can't be leaked. You just have to treat it as a bigger cage. As for anything else, it's useless even if you know about it." The scene became very quiet. The atmosphere was like a rope that suddenly became taut. The 4 emperors looked at the Golden King, feeling that this matter was not simple. "Since you said so, then so be it." The sagely king spoke first, easing the atmosphere slightly. "Since you don't want to talk about this, why did you call everyone here?" The War King said, "I think that if we want to defeat the Red Calamity, we should work more closely together," the Golden King said. "Isn't it enough now?" the Hero King asked. "In anyone's opinion, the fact that the emperors of the 5 empires were gathered together for a meeting was enough to represent the unity of humanity." "It's not enough." The Golden King shook his head. "Then what do you want?" the War King asked. "Let's issue a currency that can be used by the 5 empires," the Golden King said. "I've even thought a name. It'll be called the 5 Emperor Coin." "What did you say?" The War King slammed the table and stood up. The other emperors also raised their eyebrows and widened their eyes. Their faces were full of surprise, and they instantly forgot about the Great Cosmos Formation. This was too big a deal. If we have a currency that can be used by the 5 empires, then the resources in each of our empires can. The Golden King began to explain the benefits of common currency. This we understand, but this is very important. We have to think about it. The Iron Blood King raised his hand and interrupted him. Usually, people who didn't like to talk would speak with a clear thought process and go straight to the point. It was very easy for them to attract the attention of others. The Iron Blood King's speech quickly won the approval of the other three kings. Think about it again. The Iron Blood King only said one sentence from beginning to end, and he temporarily ended the second conference of the kings in the south of the Middle Empire. Qilin, Staya, and Aisha were trekking through mountains and rivers, hurrying on with their journey. Jilin looked impatient, but there was nothing he could do. His real body was gone, so he couldn't bring Staya and Aisha directly to the wilderness. Can't your teleportation portal be used? Jilin looked at Aisha and said, "Do you know how much material is needed to build a long-distance teleportation portal? Can you give it to me?" Aisha became more stubborn when she knew that Jilin's real body wouldn't be back for a while. "Why are we going to the wilderness?" Staya asked. "It's said that it's the territory of the orcs since ancient times. There are countless orcs there, and they seem to eat humans. Why? Are you scared?" Jilin asked. "The Knights of Light are fearless. The evil race that eats humans should be judged by the knights," Staya said righteously. Then to pigs, cows, and sheep, "Humans are also an evil race that eats pigs, cows, and sheep," Jilin said casually as he pushed aside a tree in front of him with one hand. He felt like they were lost. This path was covered in thick grass and dense forests. There was no sign of a path built by humans. "Let the crow see the path," Jilin said. "Okay." Aisha casually threw Xiaohei, who was standing on her shoulder, into the sky. At the same time, her eyes turned purple. Xiaohei flew into the sky and circled twice. "There are people there. We can ask for directions." Aisha pointed to the west. "But they seem to be busy now." "What are they busy with?" Jilin asked casually. "Robbery," Aisha said. "That's fine. Let's not waste their time. We just need to ask for directions," Jilin said. "Let's go and take a look." "Okay," Aisha responded. As for Staya, she was still thinking about what Jilin said about pigs, cows, and sheep. "Dear bosses, brothers, please recommend me. Thank you so much." Chapter 140. Roar held a steel sword in both hands and placed it in front of him. He was extremely nervous as he looked at the group of bandits in front of him who were laughing sinisterly. Who would have thought that he would be walking alone in the mountains when a burly man would suddenly appear from the forest and say that he wanted to rob him? This was his first time facing an enemy, and it turned out to be a group of extremely vicious bandits. No, in the Middle Empire, such heroes should be called bandits. "Kid, you got guts. You actually dared to come to this path alone. Didn't you ask around and see how many years I've been in this area? Hurry up and be sensible. Hand over all your valuables, and I'm in a good mood today, so I'll let you live." A burly man with 2 axes among the bandits shouted loudly. Roar didn't know what to say. He thought to himself, "Why didn't I ask around? If I didn't ask around, how would I know that there was such a remote mountain path? However, the uncle who guided me here didn't tell me that there was such a group of bandits on this mountain. Big brother, I think this kid is a bit stubborn." Another bandit said, "From what I see, let's not talk nonsense with him and just kill him directly. Kid, since you're so unsensible, then don't blame me. Brothers, go." The burly man with 2 axes rolled his eyes and immediately decided to let his subordinates test the waters. This burly man didn't stay in this area for so many years for nothing. His mind wasn't as rough as his appearance. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to do this business for so many years without any problems. He knew that although this world wasn't considered bad, it definitely wasn't considered peaceful. Therefore, there were usually only 2 kinds of people who dared to walk alone in the wilderness. One was a young and inexperienced person who didn't know much about the world and wasn't afraid of tigers. The other was a skilled and daring person who pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger. Therefore, he had to be careful and not accidentally offend any important people who couldn't be offended. Otherwise, he would die in vain. The burly man had been playing this game for so many years and was already very familiar with it. Later on, if it was a young man who didn't know what to say, he would directly take him down. At that time, whether he lived or died would be up to him. But if he was an expert, then it would be easy to handle. All he had to do was to shout at his brothers who had already made a move and take the lead to kneel down in front of the expert. Then he would cry bitterly and apologize. Then he would make up some excuse about not being able to control himself. Normally, when the expert saw that their leader didn't make a move, they wouldn't bother to argue with him. Roar used the long sword in his hand to accurately parry a bandit's long spear. Then he took half a step back and dodged a long saber. Before leaving the Saimai Empire, the Shengming king had specially arranged for the best sword master to teach him swordsmanship. After all, he couldn't let a hero hold a sacred sword but not know how to use it. The man with the double axes looked at Roar blocking left and right in the middle of the encirclement. The more he watched, the more he felt at ease. Although this kid had some skills, it was not to the extent that they could not take him down. The burly man spat on his hands and rubbed them together. He then raised his axe and was about to attack. At this moment, a slightly lazy voice sounded behind him. It's really a robbery. It was Jilin's voice. Stop. It was Staya's voice. How dare you rob in broad daylight? How arrogant. The burly man looked around. There were bushes and trees everywhere. He didn't think that he was blocking anyone's way. However, when he saw that the three people in front of him were very calm, he couldn't help but be more cautious. He then clenched his fist and said to Jilin, Haha, I wonder which gang you three are from. Why are you interfering with my Hayashi Mountain and Li Sun's business? If you are from a gang, hurry up and tell me your name so that we don't get into trouble. Jilin looked at Aisha and asked, What's Hayashi Mountain? He felt that Staya wasn't very familiar with these things. It should be a nickname. Aisha said, I heard that the robbers of the Middle Empire like to give themselves nicknames. Oh. Jilin nodded. Where's the Dragon King Temple? My father is the Fire Dragon King. My mother is the Golden Dragon King. However, the Black Dragon King is the king of the dragon race. I wonder which Dragon King Temple this guy is talking about. Stop. Aisha made a stop gesture. She suddenly felt that her head was hurting. That Dragon King is not the same as you. The burly man with the double axes was a bit confused. He didn't expect that one of the three newcomers was an idiot. The woman who was talking to the idiot didn't sound like an experienced person either. She hadn't even heard of his name. As for the woman who told him to stop, he was still a little unclear about her background. The burly man rolled his eyes and made up his mind. He raised his hand and signaled his brothers to stop. He then said to Staya loudly, Okay, as the saying goes, meeting by chance is fate. Today I'll give you some face. Let's have a duel. If you win, I'll send you and this guy away. If you lose, give me all your belongings and I won't kill you. What do you think? Okay, Staya said. Li Sun immediately sneered in his heart. When he saw Staya agree so readily, he couldn't help but look down on her a little. He thought to himself, if I can't beat you, I'll let you go. I can't stop you. However, if you can't beat me, I'll show you how powerful I am. Are you done? Staya said, Come on, come at me anytime. Li Sun grinned. He knocked his pair of axes against each other in front of his chest. Sparks flew everywhere. All right then, Staya agreed and took out the shield of sworn promise from who knows where. Li Sun saw Staya take out a shield out of thin air. His eyes widened and he cursed in his heart. Oh no! In this world, the only people who could take things out of thin air, other than those street performers, were those powerful people who had space storage artifacts. Li Sun immediately threw away the axes in his hands and planned to kneel down and surrender. However, Staya didn't give him the chance to do so. There was a loud bang. Li Sun spun and flew out, crashing into a large tree. Countless broken branches and leaves fell from the impact. Blood flowed all over his face, making him look incomparably miserable. Staya looked at Li Sun and nodded. She was very satisfied with her control of her strength. She had already held back. Otherwise, Li Sun would have broken 2 trees without a problem. The rest of the bandits were stunned. They never would have thought that such a delicate-looking girl with slender arms and fair skin would be able to send their leader flying. It was unknown which clever bandit shouted at the top of his lungs, "Run!" This directly woke up the robbers who were still there. With a whoosh, the robbers instantly scattered. They ran in all directions. And grasped the timing of their escape very neatly. They looked very experienced. It was obviously not their first time doing something like this. As for Li Sun, who was leaning against the tree and spitting out blood, no one looked at him. The group of robbers thought that Master Li was going to die today and couldn't run away. Jilin and Aisha looked at the robbers who ran in all directions. Of course, they just stood there and didn't do anything. They had heard of the principle of eliminating evil, but the problem was that they weren't good people either. Staya wanted to do something, but she was alone and couldn't do anything. "Thank you for saving me. I'll never forget your kindness," Roar quickly said to Staya. After traveling in the Middle Empire for more than half a month, he also learned a little bit of the Middle Empire's way of speaking. "I saw injustice on the road, so I just casually helped." Staya smiled sweetly. Roar also smiled, but the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He just saw how Staya knocked a big guy away. It was really shocking. "You're injured?" Staya saw a few wounds of different sizes on Roar's body. "Come, let me treat them for you." "No need, no need." Roar quickly waved his hand and said. He was a bit embarrassed. Who would have thought that the future hero of mankind would be injured while dealing with a few robbers on the side of the road? Wouldn't the world laugh their heads off if they knew about this? "I thought you said you wouldn't interfere with our work." Jilin shook his head and said helplessly. Aisha shrugged, indicating that there was nothing she could do. Now that Jilin's real body wasn't here, she wasn't confident that she could suppress Staya. "You really don't need to?" Staya still looked at Roar with concern. "You're still bleeding." It's okay, I'm really okay." Roar still refused and then said softly, "I'll do it myself." As Roar spoke, he put away the long sword in his hand and took out a magic wand from his sleeve. Lesser healing spell. The tip of the magic wand flashed with holy light. The wounds on Roar's body started to magically heal quickly. Staya's eyes were filled with surprise. She didn't expect to meet people from the Church of Light in the Middle Empire. Jilin and Aisha looked at each other and thought, did people from the Church of Light like to practice both magic and martial arts? Chapter 141. "So you're from the Church of Light," Staya said in surprise. Being able to see one's compatriots in a foreign country always made one feel close. "I didn't expect you to be able to tell that I'm from the Church of Light at first glance. That's rare in the Middle Empire," Roar said in surprise. "Senior, you're really knowledgeable. My name is Roar. May I know your name?" Aisha and Jilin looked at each other and smiled. Of course she could tell at first glance. Luo Air's greeting of Senior was a matter of course. However, Staya was stunned. No one had ever called her that before. She was only 26 or 27 years old. With her amazing talent, the vast resources of the Saimai Empire, and the support of the Sacred Book of Light, she became a level 9 diamond level powerhouse at such a young age. Therefore, even though she was at a high level, it was still her first time being called senior. For some reason, Staya felt uncomfortable even though there was nothing wrong with the term. Wu Yuqing, Staya said. That was the alias Staya used when she was in the capital, pretending to be someone from the Middle Empire. Aisha's comment was very harsh. However, Staya still insisted on calling her that. Apparently, there was a hidden meaning behind it. "Oh, Senior Wu, nice to meet you." Roar bowed to Staya in a serious manner as a courtesy from the Church of Light. Staya wanted to bow back to him subconsciously, but fortunately, she stopped herself. "I'm not that much older than you. You don't have to call me senior," Staya said. "Oh yeah, why did you come to the wilderness alone?" Roar was silent for a moment. After a while, he said, "Originally, this matter was not good to tell others, but since Big Sister Wu asked, then I have nothing to hide. Actually, I wanted to go to the capital of the Middle Empire. Originally, I only wanted to walk on the main road, but later I met a few warm-hearted people who pointed me to a few shortcuts. So I walked this way. Even the path up the mountain was told to me by an uncle in a small town at the foot of the mountain. I didn't expect to encounter these bandits. If it wasn't for Big Sister Wu, the outcome would have been unimaginable. Thank you again, Big Sister Wu. Staya raised her hand to Roar and gestured, indicating that it was not worth mentioning. At the same time, he thought about his current position. What kind of shortcut was this? They were about to leave the Middle Empire and enter the territory of the Nanshin Empire. Who on earth gave you the Tao? Aisha smiled, thinking that the uncle at the foot of the mountain must be the accomplice of these bandits. They were doing this kind of shady business, luring ordinary people to the bandits' lair. Then, they would split the profits with the bandits. This kind of trick was not uncommon. Only Jilin thought that this human was stupid. This was half the distance from the capital of the Middle Empire. How far away must one be from the Middle Empire? How stupid must one be to walk this way? If you want to go to the capital, you have to go north now, Staya said. Your route is a bit off. Is it very far? Roar asked. It's okay. Staya laughed dryly. She thought that it was not too far. You almost turned around and walked back. How did the Church of Light have a talent like you? Then, Big Sister Wu, where are you going? Why did you come to this barren mountain? Roar asked. We want to go to the Nanshin Empire. We came here to ask for directions, Staya said. Then you can ask the people at the foot of the mountain. They are very helpful, Roar recommended enthusiastically. No, Aisha said with a smile. After seeing what happened to you, we decided not to ask. Huh? Roar laughed awkwardly. Then, he said solemnly, I don't think it's a good time to go to the Nanshin Empire now. If you don't have to go, Big Sister Wu, it's better if you don't go. What do you mean? Staya asked. I heard that the Nanshin Empire is going to war. Roar said, War? Staya shouted in surprise. With who? This was the biggest question in Staya's mind. Now, all the human empires were united. They were accumulating power to fight against the common enemy of mankind, which was Jilin behind her. At this time, everyone didn't even have time to conserve their energy. How could they fight against each other? Since the empires wouldn't attack each other, the Nanshin Empire was the most warlike of the 5 empires. How could there be an enemy to fight against? It's said to be the Beastmen, Roar said. That shouldn't be. Staya was a little puzzled when he heard Rawl's words. The Beastmen and the Southern Exian Empire are at war almost every day, but in the past few years, there have always been some small frictions. It's just small skirmishes. How did it spread so widely? It's different this time, Roar said. It said that this time, the Beastmen will use all their power to attack the Nanshin Empire. Meanwhile, the Nanshin Empire is also on high alert and has made preparations for war. Why is it like this? Staya asked with a frown. The Beastmen have been living peacefully for decades without making any big moves. Why would they suddenly want to go all out against the Southern Exian Empire? There must be some unknown reason for this. Even Jilin's attention was attracted. He was puzzled. Didn't Singh keep saying that he couldn't win? Why would they suddenly start an all-out war? Wasn't this change a little too fast? It seems to be because the Beastmen have a new Beast King, Roar said with uncertainty. When the new king ascends the throne, the warlike Beastmen will use a huge war to announce the birth of a new king to the world. This is the tradition of the Beastmen. It's also to establish the power of the new Beast King. Jilin raised his eyebrows. Why haven't I heard of this before? Establishing power? Staya didn't understand. Did they want to start an empire-level war just to establish power? Countless lives would be sacrificed if that happened, just for such a meaningless purpose. Staya felt that it was ridiculous. Yes, it's to establish power. Roar didn't sense Staya's thoughts. He continued, There's only one way for the Beast King of the Beastmen to establish power. That is to lead the entire Beastmen to win a war. To prove to all the Beastmen that the Beastmen can win under his leadership. Aisha couldn't bear to look at Roar, who was talking nonstop. She thought that this child really knew everything when he asked for directions in the Middle Empire. Except for the directions, this child didn't think that if he was in the Middle Empire, would he have heard so many rumors about the Beastmen and the Nanshin Empire? Did he take the wrong path? Bane was already stupid enough. She didn't expect to meet someone who was even more stupid than him today. That's not right. Staya thought about it seriously. She still felt that something didn't make sense. The Beastmen have changed many Beast Kings over the years. Why haven't they all started an unprecedented war like this one? This is putting all of their eggs in one basket. If they lose this war, even if the beastmen don't perish, they won't be able to recover. Is the new beast king a lunatic? Jilin's eyes widened. What does this have to do with me? This is the first time I've heard of this. However, Jilin only glared this time. He didn't say anything. Swallowing this humiliation really didn't suit his status as a dragon that he was proud of. Jilin didn't want to, but he couldn't do anything about it. Staya's mental state was a bit abnormal during this time. She always wanted to take the sacred book of light and perish together with Jilin. That day, Staya woke up after a few days of sleep. When she opened her eyes, she saw Jilin and Aisha standing in front of her. Staya's expression darkened. She thought that Jilin had succeeded. The imperial jade seal of the Middle Empire was stolen. The capital city was in a mess. There were many casualties in the capital city. She was very sad. However, who knew that things would take a turn in the blink of an eye? She knew that Jilin's real body had been sent to another world by the Qianquan array. The one in front of her was the only clone of Jilin in this world. Staya, the light knight and saint of light, who symbolized light and justice, was furious. She was so angry that she even dared to do evil. She knew that the Sword Saint used the Four Saints array to obtain a little bit of divine power. He was able to make Jilin's clone helpless and self-destruct in the Four Saints array. Now that she had the Sacred Book of Light, if she risked her life to obtain a little bit of divine power, would she be able to erase Jilin's clone from this world? There would be no more red disaster in this world. Although she felt sorry for Jilin, for the sake of all humans, she would pay for Jilin's life. Staya got more excited as she thought about it. She even took out the Sacred Book of Light. In the end, it was Aisha who kept persuading her. She said that even if she could destroy the clone, Jilin would definitely be able to return to this world again. There was no meaning in doing so. This made Staya give up on the idea for the time being. However, Jilin felt that Staya's eyes were still shining with a crazy light when she looked at him. Even Jilin could not help but raise his eyebrows. Jilin truly felt that humans were a magical race. As long as the timing was right, even the most devout believer of God could instantly turn into the craziest terrorist. The most magical thing was that the transformation process did not seem abrupt at all. This was because from his point of view, Staya, who wanted to use the Sacred Book of Light to perish together with his clone, was naturally a terrorist with a broken brain. However, from the point of view of Staya and other humans, she was a great hero who dared to sacrifice herself for the sake of humanity. There were many things that were not right or wrong, black or white. It was just a matter of perspective. Jilin thought to himself. Chapter 142. It didn't matter what Jilin was thinking. In short, what he was doing now was to try his best to retreat when facing Staya. Sword Saint was a legendary master, and there were tens of thousands of well-trained elite soldiers of the Middle Empire to help share the burden of the backlash. He only bore a little divine power, but he was still half dead. Although Staya was blessed by nature, she was only a diamond-level human. Once she used her divine power, there was no possibility of her surviving. This was Jilin's judgment. This was not good for anyone. As a member of the dragon race, there was no way he could allow the princess to die in his hands in such a heroic and righteous manner, right? After all, there was no such plot in any story. The Megalosaurus caught the princess. The princess didn't wait for anyone to save her, nor did she surrender. Instead, she dragged the Megalosaurus down with her without hesitation. Okay, now there was nothing else to do, and there was no need for any other characters to appear. The story was over. It was indeed clean and neat, but it was a little too simple and straightforward. Therefore, Jilin decided that in order to not let such a blunt story happen to him, he would try not to provoke her. He didn't want her to be hot-headed and really die with this clone of his. Sister Wu, I advise you to seriously consider it. This time, I heard that the orcs are unprecedentedly united. Even the Nanshin Empire is feeling a lot of pressure. Do you really want to go? Roar was still insisting on persuading Staya, and the others to go to the Nanshin Empire. He didn't want his benefactor to be in danger for no reason. Staya thought to herself, "This is not what I want to go." She turned around and glared at Jilin, meaning to say, "What do you mean?" Jilin spread out his hands, indicating that there was no other way. They had to go to the Nanshin Empire. At the same time, in his heart, this woman seemed to have become fiercer. Was this what humans often said? Everything happens in turn? A dragon in the shallows will be teased by shrimps, and a tiger in the plains will be bullied by dogs? "Yes, we have to go," Staya said. "But you don't have to worry. We can guarantee our own safety." Roar recalled the shocking scene of Staya easily knocking away a large man and nodded. He felt that Staya's words made sense and did not say anything more. "All right, it's getting late now, and I still have to hurry on my journey. I'll bid farewell to all of you here." Roar stood up and saluted Jilin and the other two. Roar, will never forget your life-saving grace. I will definitely repay you in the future." Roar spoke very solemnly, but in his heart, he silently added a sentence that he didn't say. "If I can survive after defeating the Red Calamity, do you know how to get to Beijing or not?" Jilin suddenly asked. This question caused Luo Air to freeze on the spot. "That way." Jilin raised his hand and casually pointed in a direction. "Thank you." Roar hurriedly thanked Jilin and was about to leave with his head lowered. This was too awkward. "Wait." Staya grabbed Roar from behind and glared at Jilin at the same time. "Sister Wu, what's wrong?" Roar asked. "I say." Staya's tone was unprecedentedly serious. "Don't believe everything others say so easily. If you want to go to Beijing, it's that way." Staya pointed to the north for Roar. Roar once again thanked her with a face full of shame. After saying goodbye, he hurriedly left. Staya looked at Roar's back with a face full of worry. He thought to himself, "I really don't know which family's adults are so assured to let such an innocent child go out alone." Actually, she could not blame Roar for being naive. Although he had encountered misfortune in his family since he was young, his temperament was indeed much more mature than his peers. However, he had grown up in Flens, a small town that was friendly and protective of its people. Everyone in the town knew that he was an orphan, so they took good care of him. Therefore, Roar had never seen anyone with evil intentions. He thought that there were only two kinds of evil in the world. One was the evil demon described in the Holy Bible of Light, and the other was the Red Disaster. Seeing that Roar had walked away, Jilin and Aisha looked at each other and could not help but shake their heads. They thought that this was probably the last time they would see Roar. Because with this kid's intelligence, it would be too difficult for him to survive in human society. After a short moment of lamentation, Aisha came to Li Sun, who was still unconscious. She raised her right hand, and a shining purple rune rose from her hand. "Do you want to get up yourself? Or do you want to try this?" Aisha smiled like a flower as she said. It could also be said that her smile was very fake. Li Sun could not help but open his eyes a little and squint at Aisha. This is... Li Sun could not care less about pretending to be dead. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, and his eyes were wide open as he looked at the rune in Aisha's hand. He could not stop shouting, but his body was still sitting on the ground, and he panicked and stepped back. Unfortunately, his back was against the tree, and he had nowhere to run. "You know this?" Aisha was a little curious about Li Sun's reaction. "I know it." Li Sun swallowed a mouthful of saliva and looked at Aisha nervously. His voice was trembling as he spoke. It was as if he was afraid that Aisha would use the rune on him. More than 100 years ago, a religion called the Dark God cult rose up in the Middle Empire. This rune is the Dark God cult's signature technique. It is said that it is very vicious, and everyone who has experienced it is better off dead than alive. At that time, countless people were terrified by the name. Li Sun wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. But later on, the Dark God cult was suppressed by the Central Empire's imperial court with an iron fist, and not long after, they disappeared without a trace. Those who could master this evil technique have all been killed. Who are you? What do you want to do? As expected of someone from the Jianghu, you're really experienced and knowledgeable, Aisha said with slight praise. At the same time, she put away the rune, thinking that she just wanted to find out something and would not scare him to death. Under Li Sun's extremely attentive guidance, Jilin and the others quickly walked out of the dense forest. They came to the road leading to the Nanshin Empire. Li Sun nodded and bowed as he respectfully sent the three of them off. Jilin and Aisha, of course, did not bother to pay attention to this kind of person. He was not even worthy of their attention. Only Staya said that this person must not be left alone. She had met him today, but what if he was a normal person? The consequences would be unimaginable. Li Sun immediately knelt on the ground and pointed to the sky with tears streaming down his face. He swore that he would turn over a new leaf and never do these kinds of things again. I hope that the heroine will spare me for the sake of my 80-year-old mother and my still crying piteously for the sake of my children. Staya didn't say anything. On the contrary, it was Aisha who couldn't help but laugh out loud. These bandits were really interesting. Even when they were begging for their lives, they didn't think before speaking. You have an 80-year-old mother. Looking at your age, your mother must have been in her 40s when she gave birth to you. Isn't it a bit too late? Li Sun's face instantly turned pale. It was not that he was stupid and couldn't think of a better explanation. It was just that Aisha's rune really scared him out of his wits. His usually very smart brain seemed to be useless at this moment. He could only instinctively say some lies that were full of loopholes, while Staya was still hesitating on how to deal with this bandit. Jilin, who had been very quiet these days, finally couldn't take it anymore. He was like a ghost as he quietly came behind Li Sun. Under Staya's shocked gaze, he put his hand into Li Sun's back. "How much more time do you want to waste on this ant?" Jilin said lightly. Chapter 143. Li Sun was still kneeling on the ground. He looked down at the hand that came out of his chest in a daze. He felt strange because he had never seen such a clean hand. There was not even a trace of dirt on the hand. It was so clean that it didn't seem to belong to this world. He had just killed a person, but there was not even a trace of blood on it. That was Li Sun's last thought. In the end, he slowly closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. He died just like that. For a robber who killed and robbed, it was considered a worthy death. As the saying goes, if you walk by the river, your shoes will get wet. If you walk on the road at night too much, you will definitely meet a ghost. Of course, it could also be said that the heavens were right and the retribution was not pleasant. Li Sun's body slowly slid down from Jilin's arm. Finally, he laid on the ground. There was a big hole in his chest, and the surroundings of the hole were charred black. That was a burn mark. It was as if someone had stabbed him in the chest with an iron rod that was as thick as an arm. It was so hot that it was burning red. It was a hair-raising scene. Aisha subconsciously touched her lower abdomen. She felt that the wound that was stabbed by Jilin was suddenly a little painful. Staya immediately recalled the fair-skinned girl who was like a porcelain doll. The girl who stood on top of the godly weapon fortress of the Snow Wind Empire and threatened to take revenge on the Snow Wind Empire. The girl who stunned Jilin before she died. Gina. On that night, Jilin was still inexperienced. There were a lot of common knowledge that Jilin didn't understand. Bane asked Jilin to give him 2 minutes, and Jilin agreed. However, Jilin didn't understand what 2 minutes was, so he turned around and asked himself. At that time, he didn't have the patience to explain the meaning of this word to him. He only told him to count 120, which was 2 minutes. Therefore, after Qi Lin seriously counted to 120, he directly killed Qi Na. Before anyone could react, the girl was dead. This incident was a hurdle in Staya's heart that she could not get over. She always thought that if she had spoken a little more, that girl might have been able to live. Because of this incident, Staya finally realized how insignificant a human was in Jilin's eyes. A human's life was not worth waiting for even a second. However, after experiencing so many things, Staya thought that Jilin had changed. He sheltered the dwarves, who were also like ants in his eyes, and provided them with dragon flames, allowing their forging skills to improve by leaps and bounds. Everyone in the dwarf clan was deeply grateful. Like any other ordinary man, he would go to the red light district of the capital to drink. He would drink from the moon in the middle of the sky to the east. That night, Jilin's reputation soared. The people in the red light district were all shocked when they saw him. When the experienced men who didn't go that night heard about this, they all beat their chests and stomped their feet. They hated themselves for not being lucky enough to miss the chance to see the god of wine. He would also be like any other normal friends. In order for the third prince to pursue Miss Shueching, he would rack his brains and come up with some unreliable ideas. He would almost help the third prince kick down the wall between the umbrella shop and the cloth shop. He would also be like the boy next door. He would live in a small courtyard and receive the vegetables that the neighbor would occasionally send over. In the end, he would shyly thank her. He had become very much like a human now. That was what Staya thought in her heart. However, Li Sun's death was like a bucket of cold water that was poured over Stee's head. It was bone-chilling. Once again, it made her realize that this was a dragon, not a human. Even if he did change, it was just like the famous saying of the Middle Empire. A leopard can't change its spots. No one can easily decide the life and death of others. Staya said. Jilin didn't know what Staya meant, but he still said, I'm not a human. Yes. Staya reached out her hand and took out the sacred book of light. Just because you're not a human, you think you can casually kill humans. He's a robber. Jilin glanced at Li Sun's body and said with a frown. But it doesn't mean he's unforgivable, Staya said. The sins of humans should be judged by God or the law. This is the rule of humans, and it's extremely stupid, Jilin said. This is because humans know how precious life is, Staya said. Humans' lives are extremely short, and they will die in the end, Jilin said. Every human knows that life will come to an end sooner or later. But even so, people still don't look down on life. Staya said. It's because you think so that you don't have any psychological burden when you kill people. Since they will die sooner or later, it's fine to kill them. The result will be the same anyway. Isn't that what you think? Jilin looked at Staya in silence, because there was nothing to say. I knew it. Staya shook her head and sighed. The white light on her body suddenly shone brightly. It was so bright that Aisha couldn't open her eyes. When the light disappeared, 3 pairs of pure white wings spread out behind Staya's back. Staya's blonde hair fluttered in the wind. Under the contrast of the white wings, it was as bright as gold. She had changed into her knight armor and held the shield of promise and the hammer of victory. She was like an angel in armor descending, just like the legendary Valkyrie, the power of the god of light descending, holding the sacred book of light. As the saintess of the Church of Light, Staya was the most favored human other than the Pope and Roar. In many ways, she was different from Sword Saint, who didn't worship Buddha and only knew how to pray at the last minute. Staya used the power of the god of light, unlike Sword Saint, who had to set up a formation and had tens of thousands of soldiers to help. Secondly, she didn't have to chant long and complicated spells to guide the power. But this didn't mean that Staya didn't have to pay a price for using the power. The vast power was attached to every part of Staya's body from inside out. The strong pressure seemed to want to crush her before her enemies. In this world, no one's life is guaranteed. Staya looked at Jilin and said, So you want to kill me for everyone? Jilin said with slight mockery, This is your so-called justice. This is just one of your clones. Your real body is in that world, Staya said. Jilin, stay in that world. There are no humans there. No one will disturb you. Don't come back. No. Jilin shook his head slowly. How can an ant blaspheme the dignity of the dragon race? Staya knew that Jilin was referring to the Middle Empire, where Sword Saint used the Qiankuan formation to send him to another world. Even if he was careless, it was still a great humiliation to him. I will pay with my life, Staya said in a low voice. Jilin looked at Staya's body glowing with white light and 6 wings on her back, and said nonchalantly, You are going to die anyway. If that's the case, then let's do it, Staya said as she raised the victory hammer in her hand. A ray of white light suddenly appeared between heaven and earth, rising from the ground and piercing through the clouds. Just a little bit of divine power was enough to shake the heavens and earth. Staya gathered billions of rays of light into one and shot towards Jilin. This was the power of the god of light. Every ray of light in the world was her sword. A sword that could pierce through everything. Holy wall. Jilin looked at the ray of light that shot towards him. He actually used the Church of Light's signature skill, a red holy wall that could only cover one person, but it was so thick that it was almost solid appeared above Jilin's head. During the Battle of Snowfire, Jilin learned the King of Fighters' fist techniques and flace magic after seeing them once. It was hard for Jilin not to know a skill like the holy wall that always appeared in front of him. Jilin planned to use the Church of Light skill to take on the God of Light's glory. A ray of light that was enough to blind humans lit up in front of Jilin. Everyone in the Middle Empire and the Nanshan Empire could see it. Staya floated in the sky and looked at Jilin's position. She knew that even if it was Jilin's clone, it wouldn't be so easy to take care of it. She was just testing the waters. The light slowly dimmed, and Jilin's figure appeared. From his appearance, it didn't seem like he had changed at all. My clone didn't fight with the one with the sword. It's self-destructed in the Middle Empire. It's not that I think I can't win, but I don't think it's necessary to fight with a human in such a big way. Jilin looked at Staya and said, "Don't think you can win against me just because you have some divine power." "I know," Staya said. "Cross seal, sacrifice, humility, bravery, fairness, holy cross spear." Staya used a few skills in a row. She couldn't hold on much longer with her divine power, so she decided to put all her eggs in one basket and end the battle as soon as possible. Cross seal was a skill that placed a mark on the enemy's body. It didn't do much damage, but it was very effective when used together with the holy cross spear. Fairness and humility were skills that weakened the enemy. In Staya's current state, her skills could affect Jilin's clone. Bravery was a skill that strengthened oneself. As for sacrifice, very few people used it because it was a skill that traded a life for a life. But for Staya, it was nothing. Everything was set up. Staya raised the holy cross spear and aimed it at Jilin. Jilin shook his head. It seemed like Staya had been planning this battle for a long time. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to use so many skills so smoothly and perfectly. She didn't even have a chance to choose or hesitate. Jilin winked at Aisha when he saw Staya putting her life on the line. Aisha, who was standing in the dark and watching the battle, nodded. She quietly took out the dark scripture and gently flipped to a page. "Everyone, please recommend me." "Thank you." Chapter 144. Light and darkness could coexist, but the premise was that no one was close to the other. But if the two met, either the light would dispel the darkness, or the darkness would devour the light. Aisha secretly opened the scripture of darkness in the light when Staya was fully focused on fighting Jilin. This was simply taking drastic measures to deal with the problem. Extremely vicious. The scripture of light was uncontrollably suppressing the scripture of darkness, so Staya had to be in trouble. Her opponent was Jilin, so Staya naturally didn't dare to hold back. But she didn't hold back at all. She didn't expect Jilin to use such a despicable method against her. He really didn't care about the pride of the dragon race at all. Staya cursed in her heart. The energy in Staya's body became unstable, and it instantly caused a huge impact on Staya. This kind of internal injury was the most fatal. Staya actually spat out a mouthful of blood. It landed on the silver-white armor in front of her chest. With Jilin's strength, of course, he wouldn't miss this opportunity. He even had the energy to give Aisha a thumbs up. Jilin's feet moved slightly, and he instantly appeared in front of Staya. Normally, Staya wouldn't have been able to react in time. But it was different now. Staya, who had the support of divine power, clearly captured Jilin's movements. Even if she was suffering from serious internal injuries, it was still the same. Staya forced herself to throw the Holy Judgment Cross spear at Jilin. But its power wasn't as strong as before, and it felt like it was an arrow at the end of its flight. Jilin obviously didn't choose to dodge such an attack. He directly threw out 2 punches. The first punch shattered the Holy Judgment Cross spear like it was nothing. The second punch knocked out Staya, and at the same time, shattered the holy light on her body. I didn't expect you to be able to knock someone out of the god's descent state with just one punch. Aisha looked at Staya, who was lying unconscious on the ground, and clicked her tongue in wonder. It's nothing. The main thing is that the energy in her body is unstable, and her breath is in a mess. That's why I had the opportunity. Jilin said, You humans call this state God's descent? Only witches call it that, Aisha said. I didn't expect to see the god of light descending today. Staya really has a trump card. How is she? Jilin pointed at Staya, who was lying on the ground, and asked. Aisha frowned as she glanced at Staya and then at Jilin. She didn't understand why the smart Jilin would ask such an obvious question. Was there a need to ask? He was already bleeding from all 7 orifices. It was obvious that he was about to die, right? Aisha didn't believe that Jilin couldn't see how serious Staya's injuries were. Anyway, if she was the one who fought with others and beat them up like this, she wouldn't waste time to check whether the person was dead or not. Aisha looked at Jilin and clearly expressed this in her eyes. Jilin also frowned and looked at Aisha, implying that she should take a closer look. Aisha shook her head and felt helpless. She walked to Staya's side and squatted down. First, she put her fingers on Staya's neck, then she pressed on her stomach, and finally she put her fingers on Staya's wrist. After completing this set of actions smoothly, Aisha slowly stood up. She smiled faintly at Jilin and said with certainty, You're dead meat. Jilin was rarely moved. No, do you know how to do it or not? If you don't know, don't talk nonsense. Of course, medicine and herbology are the foundation of witches. Aisha shouted confidently, as if Jilin was insulting her by questioning her profession. But why are you so surprised? Didn't you just say that she's dead? I just said it casually. Jilin frowned and said, his voice suddenly lowered. And didn't I interrupt her? It has nothing to do with that. Aisha sneered and shook her head. God's descent is like opening a big hole in a person's body. It doesn't make a difference whether he bleeds more or less. Anyway, he's going to die in the end. Then how come the one with the sword is fine? Jilin asked. You said yourself. Tens of thousands of people shared the backlash. How can it be the same? Aisha was speechless. Jilin looked at Staya, who was lying on the ground. He wanted to say something, but didn't. In the end, he gently shook his head, thinking that he was probably the only dragon who killed the princess. Damn it! Since ancient times, many dragons had captured princesses. But which dragon didn't take good care of them and treat them like masters? Which dragon would capture a princess today and another princess tomorrow, and then kill them one by one? He had never heard of it. Dragons didn't need to eat themselves. They had to find food for their princesses themselves. Otherwise, which princess could wait until a hero came to save her? They would have starved to death. But now, he had only captured a princess, and she had even died in his hands. He was ashamed. He was a disgrace to the dragon race. He was too ashamed to face the ancestors of the dragon race. Jilin closed his eyes and sighed like the Middle Empire in his heart. He looked like he was in great pain. Aisha didn't expect Jilin to have such a big reaction. She thought that Jilin was the kind of creature who didn't care about anything and thought that he was above everything. She asked curiously, Do you care about Staya's life or death? Of course. Jilin shouted crazily, startling all the birds in the forest. Aisha hurriedly covered her ears and looked at Jilin angrily. Just now, her eardrums were hurting, and this was under the premise that she had an automatic protection item. If that's the case, why did you give Staya a chance to fight with her life on the line? Aisha covered her ears and said loudly, You should have let me use the dark scripture to stop her from the beginning. She's so stubborn. If you don't let her try, she won't be able to get through. Jilin said helplessly, Ever since she woke up in that cave, she has been looking for a chance to fight with me. I can't keep avoiding her. I thought I could protect her life. Don't worry. Aisha saw that Jilin's expression was so serious, so she finally told him the truth. Jilin suddenly raised his head. What do you mean? The Holy Scripture of Light is the #1 healing artifact in time. It said that as long as a person is still breathing, they won't die. Aisha said, even if Staya can't really use its power as a healing artifact, the artifact has the ability to automatically protect its owner. As its owner, she won't die so easily. But I can't feel her vitality anymore. In my eyes, she seems to be dead. Jilin looked at Staya and said, in his senses, all the veins in Staya's body were broken. The fire of life was like a candle swaying in the wind. It could be extinguished at any time, that's for sure. Aisha said matter-of-factly, the sacrifice of the Church of Light has been famous in the continent for so many years. It made all the strong people in the world tremble. Only these fanatical religious people could think of such a way of fighting. It's said that the moment a person uses the sacrifice, he is already a dead person, because he sacrificed himself. What are you talking about? Jilin didn't quite understand. Is this the cold joke that Bane always tells? Can she live or not? Aisha saw that Jilin was getting anxious, so she quickly said she can live. Jilin let out a big sigh of relief. At least he didn't have to be the shame of the dragon race, but she has to fake her death for a long time. Aisha added, the backlash of the divine power and the effect of the sacrifice of breaking all the veins in her body. Even with the holy scripture of light, it will take a long time to heal her. Oh, Jilin's attitude suddenly became perfunctory. He casually responded. He was completely relieved when he knew that Staya could live. As for the long time needed to heal, he didn't care. He had plenty of time anyway. Chapter 145. Jilin had always despised humans for not doing their job properly. In his opinion, all sentient beings should only work hard for one thing. That was to make their consciousness never dissipate and continue forever. In other words, it was what humans often called eternal life. This was what a living being should pursue. But humans' path had obviously gone astray. They gave up on pursuing eternal life and admitted that they were just an insignificant speck of dust in this world. They gave up the most important thing and started to play with other things. For example, war, tools, construction, business, agriculture, culture, food, martial arts, magic. This proved how boring a race was when they completely gave up on the hope of eternal life. But today, Jilin felt from the bottom of his heart that the tools created by humans for not doing their job properly were very useful. Now, Staya looked complete on the surface, but the inside was already broken and couldn't withstand too much shaking. No one could bring Staya through the Nanshin Empire to the wasteland without using any tools. Even Jilin couldn't do anything. Fortunately, humans had a slightly crooked skill tree. Tools developed by humans for the sake of comfort. Humans developed a new kind of carriage. They carved a wind magic formation on the carriage so that the person riding it wouldn't feel a trace of vibration. This was Aisha's description. Aisha had only left for less than half a day, and it was as if she had magically conjured such a carriage. Even Jilin felt that it was very incredible after trying it out. Aisha and Jilin worked together to lift Staya up as smoothly as possible. Then, they drove the carriage silently to the south. The south was about to change. The Nanshin Empire was the most warlike empire among the human empires. The other humans affectionately and in a friendly manner called them the Southern Barbarians. In the eyes of other humans, the people of the Nanshin Empire were too close to the orcs. That was why they became warlike and barbaric. As the saying goes, if you enter the Sea of Abalone, you won't smell it for a long time. That was exactly what he meant. Everyone knew that the Southern Exian Empire and the Beastmen were close to each other. Not only were they close to each other, but they were also engaged in fierce battles day after day. It was the Southern Exian Empire that sacrificed themselves to help the humans stop the savage Beastmen from going north. This allowed the humans to live in peace without having to sacrifice themselves. It was just that when they were talking about the Southern Barbarians, the bloody battles and sacrifices of the soldiers of the Nanshin Empire were deliberately forgotten. They only cared about mocking the barbarity of the people of the Southern Exian Empire to highlight their own elegance and wisdom. This was because the way humans established their superiority was by looking down on others. Fortunately, the people of the Nanshin Empire didn't care at all. They were even a little proud of it. Because in the Nanshin Empire's understanding, barbarism often equaled strength. You mocked me for being barbaric, but I said you had no strength to truss a chicken. If a warlike empire like this were to go to war, then it was only natural for the king to personally lead the troops. The war king wore a dark yellow metal armor and stood in front of a huge map with his hands behind his back. The map detailed the southern region of the Nanshin Empire, especially the map near the southern border. Even a mound and a small path were clearly marked, and in the southern part of the empire, there was only a rough shape drawn with a large shadow. The word wasteland was written on it. Near the border of the empire, there were more than a dozen arrows of different sizes and colors. They looked very complicated and crisscrossed. This represented the distribution of the Nanshin Empire's forces and the Beastman's forces. The War King's brows were tightly furrowed. His square face was dignified without being angry. It looked like he was holding his breath and concentrating on the map, as if he was rehearsing the war in his mind. This made the battle strategists in the tent a little cautious, afraid of interrupting His Majesty's battle thoughts. But in reality, the War King wasn't thinking about war at all. His mind was filled with the meeting of the kings that he attended half a month ago. What the F***CK did those people say to him? What the hell were they talking about? The War King felt a headache when he thought about what the other four emperors said. Each one was more ridiculous than the last. At the time, the War King even suspected that what he heard at the meeting of the kings was a myth. The Golden King said that he used the Great Chien Kuan formation to send the Red Disaster to another world. Then he wanted to unify the human currency. If it weren't for the fact that this was a critical period, the War King would have guessed that the Golden King wanted to swallow up the four empires and unify the world. After all, the Middle Empire's emperors had been thinking about this for generations, to the point that they were going crazy. Fortunately, the matter of the same coin was too big, so big that no one dared to act rashly, so they put it aside for the time being. As for the Great Chien Kuan formation, the War King didn't want to think too deeply about it. It was too fantastical. But fortunately, the Middle Empire gave everyone a period of time to prepare for war. After the Golden King finished speaking, the Iron Blood King, who spoke intermittently, began. He used a long time to explain a ridiculous plan, which successfully challenged everyone's patience. The general idea was that the Snow Wind Empire had unearthed a stone tablet that recorded important information about the era of gods in Morag. Based on this stone tablet, the Iron Blood King decided to create a production line of Bright Snow God soldiers and directly produce 10,000 Bright Snow God soldiers. The Iron Blood King vowed that if there were 10,000 Bright Snow God soldiers, they would definitely be able to wipe out the Red Disaster. But if they wanted to do this, they would need the resources of at least 3 empires. So he hoped that the 5 empires would share the burden. At that time, the War King nodded his head repeatedly, but he was cursing in his heart. War Bright Snow God soldiers. He had heard Musin say that one of them was able to fight with the Red Disaster for a short period of time, and it had even split open the Red Disaster's fireball that was comparable to a forbidden spell. In terms of power, it was even above legend rank. What did the Iron Blood King want to do? He wanted to mass-produce 10,000 legend rank. What kind of spirit was this? The War King felt that if he really produced 10,000 of them, the entire human economy would probably regress by 1 or 2,000 years. In other words, all humans, other than the nobles, would have to worry about their next meal. Moreover, if the Iron Blood King really had 10,000 of them, then after killing the Red Disaster, the Iron Blood King would only be able to take over the world in passing. At that time, what would the other empires do? The Iron Blood King's plan made all the emperors frown, and the atmosphere of the Conference of the Kings instantly became very heavy. At this moment, the Sacred King stood up to announce a piece of good news to ease the atmosphere. He actually said that the God of Light had suddenly descended and picked a hero. This was supposed to be exciting news, but for the sake of the hero's safety, this news was not announced to the world. This time, the War King was stunned. If he thought that he was listening to a fairy tale before, then now he thought that he was listening to a fairy tale, since the Sacred King said so. There were naturally people who asked, "Who is this hero? How strong is he? Is he at the peak of legend rank, or close to God?" The Sacred King was silent for a moment and said that the hero used to do odd jobs in the Church of Light. In terms of strength, he should have reached silver rank by now. The other emperors could not help but shake their heads. Even if the Sacred King mentioned the God of Light, it was useless. This was because no one present believed in God. They believed in the existence of God, but they did not believe in God. This included the Sacred King who ruled with religion. Then, it was the Hero King's turn. The Hero King did not say anything that the War King could not accept. He only said that the Divine Dragon Empire was currently in a very troublesome situation and did not have the spare energy to care about other things. The Divine Dragon Empire could not do anything about these things. Then, there were also people who asked what happened. At first, the Hero King was unwilling to say, but after being questioned for a long time, he finally hesitated and said. He said that a new evil cult had recently appeared in the Divine Dragon Empire, and it was called the Scarlet Dragon Sect. They were in the limelight for a while. At that time, the War King joked, "Judging from the name, this should be the Divine Dragon Empire's national religion. Why is it an evil cult?" However, the Golden King said very seriously that evil cults were very dangerous and could not be treated lightly. They should be dealt with as soon as possible. Then, the Hero King said that this matter was not easy to deal with because the founder of this cult was the legend rank expert, Flay. Back then, during the Battle of Snowfire, Flay saw the fireball released by the Red Calamity and became obsessed. She felt that she had seen the ultimate of the Tao of Fire. Thus, she planned to bring some people to follow the Red Calamity, hoping that she could improve on the Tao of Fire. Thus, the Scarlet Dragon sect developed in the Divine Dragon Empire. In addition, the Divine Dragon Empire's citizens worshipped dragons from the bottom of their hearts. This allowed the Scarlet Dragon sect to develop unexpectedly smoothly. Finally, it was the War King's turn. He said that the Beastmen had used all their strength to attack the human territory, which was a rare occurrence. He could not split himself and had to deal with that side first. As for the problem here, he would have to wait. Thus, the second conference of the kings ended without any results. Chapter 146. Your Majesty? Your Majesty? The captain of the Nanshin Empire called out softly when he saw His Majesty standing in front of the map for a long time. Looking at the map for such a long time and anticipating the battlefield. This wasn't the warlord style. He usually just glanced at the map and roughly understood the distribution of the enemy's forces. Then, he began to dispatch troops. The Beastmen would only fight fair and square anyway. They wouldn't use any tricks. He didn't have to worry about being tricked. The warlord was suddenly awakened from his chaotic thoughts. He turned to look at the captain and asked blankly, "What is it?" "Your Majesty, you've been here for a long time. How are we going to fight?" The captain asked. "Humph." The warlord snorted angrily. "How many years have the hidden beast army been fighting with the Beastmen? Do I have to teach them how to fight? Then why am I feeding them? Are they freeloaders?" The captain was frightened by the warlord's attitude. He wondered why His Majesty was in such a bad mood again, but, "Your Majesty, you said that this war is different from the past. We need to treat them differently." Although the captain was scared, he still forced himself to say it. The Battle King choked and rolled his eyes at the warrior captain. He sighed and rubbed his forehead, wondering why his subordinates were all trash like this. They're all a bunch of idiots. "Meng Jian, do you know why this war is different from the past?" the warlord asked the captain. Meng Jian was a little confused. He racked his brains, but couldn't come up with an answer. After a long time, he stammered, It's because there are more beast men this time?" The warlord looked at Meng Jian quietly. He resisted the urge to kick him to death and said calmly, "You may leave." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Meng Jian felt as if he had been pardoned. He bowed deeply to the warlord and hurried out of the tent. His Majesty is a little strange today. It's better to stay away from him. Seeing Meng Jian leave the tent, Zhan Wang couldn't help but shake his head in self-mockery. He thought to himself, I've really messed up these past few days. How could I have done something as absurd as letting Meng Jian think? As a warrior captain of the Nanxing Empire, Meng Jian's abilities went without saying. More importantly, he had the trust of the warlord. Meng Jian was born in a military family of the Nanxing Empire and had been relied on by the royal family for generations. Meng Jian had even entered the palace to practice martial arts with the warlord since he was young. The two of them grew up together and were inseparable most of the time. This kind of relationship could be said to be extremely close apart from the difference between monarch and subject. However, despite their close relationship, the Battle King had never seen Meng Jian use his brain even once. She always had the attitude of I'll do whatever you say. Don't ask me anything. Even if you ask me, I won't know. Fortunately, the position of a warrior captain did not require any brain work. It was most suitable for a loyal, obedient, and brainless person like Meng Jian. As for why this war was different from the past, it wasn't because there were more orcs this time. The difference between 600,000 and 800,000 orcs was nothing to the Empire. The problem was the timing. This was not a good time. The Middle Empire, the Saimai Empire, and the Snow Wind Empire already had a clear direction. Although the plan sounded a little far-fetched, it was the Red Calamity. However, the opponent was the Red Disaster, and this was something that couldn't be helped. No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible for humans to defeat that thing. Therefore, there was no other way. They could only take a risk and go all out. However, just as the other three empires were ready to attack, the Nanxing Empire and the Divine Dragon Empire were actually tied down by other things. The Divine Dragon Empire had an evil cult rebellion. That was actually not a big deal. In the end, it was just a group of civilian organizations that could not be seen in public. It was the same even if the organizers were legendary experts. Even if a legendary expert led a motley crew, they would not have the slightest possibility of fighting against the Empire. Legendary experts were not the Red Calamity. Therefore, the only problem was the Nanxing Empire. The orcs were one of the disasters that had troubled humans since the mythological era. Together with the elemental monsters to the west of the Saimai Empire, the demons to the north of the Snow Wind Empire, the Water Tribe to the east of the Divine Dragon Empire, and a certain hidden danger in the Middle Empire, they were known as the Five Great Calamities. They corresponded to the five empires. Each of them was said to have the possibility of destroying humans. The five empires' fundamental role was to help the entire human race resist these disasters. However, the problem was that the monsters in the volcanoes never came out of the volcanoes. The Water Tribe of the Endless Sea generally did not come ashore. The hidden danger suppressed by the Middle Empire seemed to have never erupted. The most ridiculous thing was that no one had ever seen the demons in the snowfield. In that case, only the Nanxing Empire had been resisting the orcs, and they had been conscientiously carrying out the plan to destroy humans. Therefore, in order to cooperate with the plan of the entire human race, the Nanxing Empire had to deal with the orcs first. At the very least, after this battle, the orcs would have to stop for a few years. Is this god artifact okay? Jilin looked at Staya, who had been lying in the car for a few days without moving, and asked impatiently, "Do you want to find a doctor to take a look?" Aisha glanced at the clouds in the sky and was too lazy to bother with Jilin. It was not easy to find a doctor with better medical skills than her in this place. Moreover, what doctor could be better than the Lightgrim? Jilin saw that Aisha was ignoring him, so he did not say anything more. However, he thought bitterly that Staya's current state was all because of those ignorant humans. If it had not played tricks, would his real body have been able to go to the other world? If his real body was still there, Staya knew that even if a god descended, it would not be able to do anything to him. How could Staya have the thought of fighting with her life on the line, and then make him half dead and almost make him lose the face of the dragon race? Just you wait, it will be fun when I come back from the other world. When that time comes, I will burn that Chinquan Great Array. Jilin's carriage had been traveling for a few days since they entered the southern Exian Empire. They were traveling very fast. In just a few days, they had crossed the vast territory of the southern Exian Empire and arrived at the south of the southern Exian Empire. Because the carriage was very light, the horse was very strong. The horse was an undead war horse summoned by Aisha. It was tireless and did not sleep or rest, and it ran very fast. If Jilin was not worried about Staya, it would have no problem running 2,000 or 3,000 miles a day. In terms of endurance, the warriors of the undead were the best in the world. Since entering the southern Exian Empire, the further south they went, the more frequently they saw soldiers. The atmosphere of war was also getting stronger. And in the place where Aisha and the others were now, there was an atmosphere of a coming storm, and a war was about to break out. It was as if the people here were ready to fight at any time. Their hands were always on their weapons, and they were vigilantly watching everything around them. However, although all this was seen by Jilin and Aisha, they did not take it to heart. During these days, when the carriage passed through the uninhabited wilderness, Jilin was always in charge of looking for food. He had no choice. Although he and Aisha did not need to eat, Staya was now seriously injured. He did not dare to neglect her. Originally, Jilin would never put down the noble status of a megalosaurus to serve humans. But Aisha said that if she, a witch, was to prepare food for the Saint of Light, she was afraid that she would not be able to control herself and would poison Staya to death. So Jilin silently convinced himself that it was the obligation of every dragon to support the captured princess. As soon as Jilin finished thinking in his heart, he felt that something was wrong. How was this a king hostage? They had captured an ancestor. Everyone who had been to the Middle Empire would definitely learn a sentence, and that was the phrase king hell. Jilin was no exception. There was no choice. This was the fate of the dragon race. Jilin lamented in his heart. The food was back, but how was he going to eat Staya, whose veins were all broken? This was still a problem. In the end, Jilin had no choice but to use his dragon flames to burn the food alive. He directly injected it into Staya's body. According to the human's logic, this was the best way to serve the mother. Just as Jilin looked at the clear sky and lamented his bad luck, a group of soldiers carrying 2 stretchers stopped in front of the carriage. They forced Aisha's carriage to stop. Although Aisha was a little strange, she was not crazy. She would not kill them without saying a word just because they were blocking her way. But if it was Jilin, it was very likely that he would do that. Soldiers, why are you blocking my way in broad daylight? Aisha had just come out of the Middle Empire, so she could not change the way she spoke there. Sorry to disturb you. The leader of the soldiers spoke very politely. We are soldiers of the dragon subduing army, under the control of the beast subduing army. 2 of our brothers were seriously injured in the battle with the orcs and need to be treated quickly. It is very urgent, and we hope to borrow your carriage for a while. The entire dragon subduing army will be very grateful for this kindness. At first glance, one could tell that the leader of the soldiers was a well-read person, not just a soldier. Even in such a dangerous situation, he was still able to speak in a polite and courteous manner, leaving no loopholes. If it was a normal person, they would not hesitate to get off the carriage and hand it over to the other party just by looking at the 2 injured people lying on the stretchers. Moreover, this soldier spoke so politely. But the problem was that Aisha and Jilin were not normal people. To be more precise, they were not human. Therefore, Jilin poked his head out of the carriage, looked at the leader of the soldiers, and asked, "What army did you say you were from?" "The dragon subduing army. I hope that everyone will add this to your collection. I will vote for you. Thank you very much." Chapter 147. Although this soldier's leader was very reasonable, most of the time, the army was not a place to be reasonable. Most of them were hot-tempered and preferred to talk with their fists. Because it was more convenient and faster, they were better at it. A sweaty soldier anxiously looked at his 2 brothers lying on the stretcher while glancing at the soldier leader who was still talking to the pedestrians from time to time. The veins on his forehead were exposed. It was as if a surge of hot blood was surging through his veins. "Big brother, why are you still talking to them?" The soldier finally couldn't stand it anymore. He waved his arm and walked to the leader's side and said loudly, "Dinyo and Monkey are dying. If it were up to me, we should just grab the carriage first. Whether it's compensation or a beating, we brothers will accept it. We won't fight back. Isn't that enough? Yes, big brother, De Xiong is right. Big brother, let's listen to De Xiong. The other soldiers also echoed. The soldier leader looked at De Xiong and frowned. De Xiong, you have to remember that you are now the border army of the Nanshin Empire, not the bandits who occupied the mountains in the Middle Empire. Then what do you say? Dinyo and Monkey are our brothers who have gone through fire and water with us. Now that the situation was urgent, De Xiong obviously didn't care about the military law of not offending the superior. I will deal with this matter, the soldier leader said in a deep voice. Then he turned to Jilin again and said, You too. You have seen our situation. I'm really concerned about people's lives. Can you lend the carriage temporarily? No, Aisha said righteously. The soldier leader was already a little angry. He didn't expect that the other party still wouldn't agree, even though he had already spoken to this extent. Why are you in such a hurry? Aisha said, This is my carriage. Of course, I have the right to decide whether to lend it or not. You, my brothers, fought for the country, killed the enemy bravely, and died without hesitation. In order to protect the people's lives and work in peace, they risked their lives. They are real heroes. Aisha clicked her tongue as she listened. It was obvious that she didn't agree with him. Don't tell me that just because your brother has worked hard, he can use my things whenever he wants to? You want to borrow my carriage today, so I'll lend it to you. Don't tell me that if your army runs out of food and comes to me tomorrow, I'll have to sell everything I have? What kind of logic was that? If I don't want to borrow my things, I won't. That was what made sense. After saying a few words, the leader shut his mouth because he could see the indifference of the two people in the carriage. Thus, he raised his eyebrows, lowered his head slightly, and sighed softly. Then, he suddenly raised his right hand. The sound of a sharp sword being unsheathed rang out. Other than the soldiers carrying the stretchers, everyone drew their steel sword from their waists. If that's the case, then don't blame me for offending you. Aisha smiled contemptuously, thinking that this was how people who wielded swords and guns were. No matter how reasonable they looked, in the end, they had to rely on the weapons in their hands to solve the problem. In the Middle Empire, this was called using peaceful means before resorting to force. Thinking of this, Aisha loosened her grip on Jilin's wrist. If not for Aisha holding him back, Jilin would have charged out the moment the words dragon subduing army came out. He wanted to teach these humans a lesson. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't speak whatever you want. In just a short moment, De Xiong had already raised his sword and charged forward. Although he was aggressive, he did not want to kill anyone. His big brother was right. Now that he was a soldier, his status was different. He only wanted to place his sword on the neck of the man in the carriage to scare these two bastards. His brothers were fighting for their lives on the front lines, risking their lives to ensure their safety. Now that they were only borrowing the carriage, these two bastards were still so hesitant. They deserved a beating. Although De Xiong's mind was filled with thoughts, the long sword in his hand was still aimed at Jilin's neck in a flash, accurately and quickly moving forward. This sword move was exquisite, extremely stable. Warriors who could carry their brothers onto the battlefield were not ordinary people. No matter what, they had to have some skill or two. Originally, they had thought that this would be an easy task. The leader of the soldiers was even prepared to shout, De Xiong, don't kill. Of course, he knew that De Xiong would not kill anyone. However, this was called using the carrot and stick. What happened next, however, was beyond everyone's expectations. Suddenly, everyone seemed to see a shadow pass by De Xiong's wrist. It was as though they were following the sound of the wind, hearing the cry of a crane, and raising their heads, they saw a flash of light. In other words, no one saw it clearly. No one knew what happened. All they saw was that De Xiong's sword had somehow ended up in a man's hand. De Xiong was stunned for a moment. 2 seconds later, he let out a beast-like cry. He held his wrist as cold sweat poured down his forehead like rain. He stared at Jilin. Only then did everyone realize that De Xiong's wrist had been bent into a very strange angle. All the soldiers looked at each other and raised their swords at the same time. Step by step, They slowly pressed forward with an extremely oppressive aura. They already knew that Jilin's strength was not to be underestimated. After all, he was a ruthless person who could easily break the wrist of a military expert. However, they were not afraid at all because they were the border army of the Nanshin Empire. It was not because of the glory of being a soldier. It was simply because they had a lot of people here, a lot of them. Even if they could not beat him, how could the hundreds of thousands of soldiers not be able to beat him? In this territory, if you touch the people of the subdued beast army, you can forget about being kind. Jilin looked at these humans who were facing a great enemy and smiled slightly. Who are you? The leader of the soldiers shouted in a deep voice. His expression became very solemn. You dare to openly attack the soldiers of the Nanshin Empire. Even if you have some ability, aren't you looking down on the Nanshin Empire too much? Jilin ignored him. Instead, he took a step forward and came between the two wounded soldiers. His speed was so fast that the soldiers could not see him clearly, let alone stop him. You! The soldiers of the Nanshin Empire suddenly became anxious. Jilin raised his hand and motioned for them to calm down. Then he smiled and said, Now let's sort this out. Because of these two wounded humans, you wanted to use our carriage, but we didn't want to lend it to you. Then you wanted to rob us. And in the end, you drew your swords and faced each other, right? The leader of the soldiers just opened his mouth and was interrupted by Jilin again. I have a good way to solve both our problems at the same time. We don't have to fight and kill anymore, Jilin said. What way? The leader of the soldiers said in a deep voice. While talking to Jilin, he secretly used hand signals to suppress his subordinates who were ready to move. Now that their wounded comrades were in danger, this made them very irritable. But now, that man was standing between Denyo and Monkey with a sword. They could not act rashly. Like this. Jilin looked at these soldiers and said. After Jilin finished speaking, he neatly stabbed the two stretchers with his sword. Now that you don't need the carriage, can we go? Yes. The leader of the soldiers gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. His eyes were about to burst. Go to hell. Kill. At this point, there was nothing more to say. There was no need to say anything more. Only blood for blood. It was only right. The leader of the soldiers took out a bamboo tube from behind him. He pulled it toward the sky, and a blue signal flare suddenly rushed into the sky. When it flew to the highest point, it made a violent and rapid explosion. This was the signal for help. After the signal, the leader of the soldiers rushed toward Jilin with a long spear. His face was full of unyielding determination. The soldiers behind him also rushed forward together. Jilin looked at these stupid humans, stretched his neck, and smiled lightly. His eyes turned slightly yellow. His face was very delicate now. When he smiled with such a face, it would give people a clean and comfortable feeling. But for some reason, Jilin's smile now looked a little ferocious. Half an hour later, a group of 50 cavalry came here, leaving a long trail of smoke. They looked at the blood all over the ground and the remains of the broken arms, and couldn't help but frown. Their breathing became heavier. They were all soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles and were used to staying on the battlefield all year round. More than a dozen corpses naturally didn't shock them. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't a battlefield, but the territory of the southern Exian Empire. What kind of person was so audacious, daring to kill more than a dozen soldiers of the Empire here? A cavalryman got off his horse and walked to the side of a corpse wearing a commander's armor. He squatted down and turned the corpse over. The moment he saw this person's face, the cavalryman's eyes revealed endless shock. When he saw these corpses just now, his expression didn't change much. The cavalryman blinked, suppressed the shock in his heart, and looked at the ground where the corpse was lying on. Sure enough, there was a symbol drawn on the ground. This was the secret signal used by the Southern Exian Empire's army. The meaning of this symbol was that the enemy was going west. Thank you all for the recommendation votes. Monthly votes. Reward. Thank you. Thank you. Chapter 148. The soldier took 2 deep breaths and trotted to the cavalry commander's horse. Where is he? The cavalry commander looked ahead and asked. His emotions didn't fluctuate much because of the corpses of his comrades on the ground. He had seen many dead people. No matter how these people were killed, it was because their skills were inferior. There was nothing to say. He only wanted to do one thing now, and that was to bring people to catch up with this bastard who dared to kill soldiers in the Nanshin Empire. He wanted to let him experience the ancient torture of being dismembered by 5 horses. Just nice, his horse was enough. South, the cavalry commander said. Very good, the cavalry commander praised. At least this person left a clear signal before he died. He didn't disgrace the soldiers of the Empire. Let's go. The cavalry commander shouted and was about to give chase in high spirits. He didn't want to care about the corpses on the ground. This wasn't something cavalry soldiers should do. Someone else would do this. They wouldn't let these soldiers' corpses be exposed in the wilderness. What he should do now was to catch up with the murderer and take revenge for these people. The cavalry commander squeezed his legs, and the horse under him was about to dash out. However, the cavalry commander immediately pulled the reins and stopped the horse's movement. This was because the cavalry commander was still standing in front of his horse. She looked at him with an expectant expression. Is there anything else? The cavalry commander frowned and glanced at him. He thought for a moment and asked, Who died? Mu Yunshun, the cavalry commander said with his head lowered. The cavalry commander immediately stopped breathing. His eyes widened, and his voice rose 3 octaves. He said in shock, Who did you say? Mu Yunshun. It's that scholar from the Mu family. Mu Yunshun. Yes. Are you sure you didn't see wrongly? I confirmed it several times just now. If Mu Yunshun doesn't have a hidden twin brother, then it must be Mu Yunshun. How can you be so sure? Do you know Mu Yunshun? When I was young, I was a handyman in the Mu family. I was able to practice martial arts and join the army because of the Mu family. I know all the young masters of the Mu family. The cavalry commander's eyes widened. He was silent for a long time before he said, F***ck him. I didn't expect you to have such connections. The cavalry commander dismounted and walked to Mu Yunshun's corpse. He pointed at his face and asked the cavalry, Xiao Bai, is this really Mu Yunshun? It's absolutely true, Little White said. If I didn't have absolute confidence in this kind of thing, I wouldn't dare to speak carelessly. The cavalry commander didn't say anything else. He looked up at the sky and let out a long sigh. Why did he have to encounter such a troublesome matter? The most eye-catching young master of the Mu family was dead. He was the nephew of the boxing emperor, Mu Xin. This was no small matter. The upper echelons of the Nanshin Empire would probably change. Old Lu, Old Eagle, you two hurry to the military camp. He had to tell General Mu Yunshun face to face that young Master Mu was dead. As for the murderer, tell the general that we've already gone after him, and we won't act rashly until the army arrives. Go. Yes, yes. The 2 cavalrymen complied and turned their horses around. Then they shot towards the northwest like lightning. Commander, then should we head south now? Little White asked. There's no hurry. They can't escape. The commander looked towards the south and said, We have to deal with young Master Mu's corpse first. Yes. The cavalry commander originally wanted to chase after them and tear them to shreds. Soldiers should be straightforward and settle their grudges as quickly as possible. He didn't have the leisure to deal with the corpse. But after confirming that the person who died was Mu Yunshun, he changed his mind. He didn't believe that a random bandit could kill the young master of the Mu family. Not to mention Mu Yunshun's special identity. Just his identity as a soldier of the Empire had completely eliminated this possibility. What kind of bandit would kill more than 10 soldiers near the front line of the battlefield? Damn it. Even if he wanted to die, this wasn't the way to do it. Thus, the cavalry commander believed that this must be a premeditated and targeted murder. Some important figure in the upper echelons of the Empire wanted to make a move on the Mu family. That was why he said that he wouldn't act rashly. This hidden bomb was too big, and his small head couldn't handle it. A day later, on the vast and boundless grassland, Aisha drove the carriage forward steadily, crushing countless green grass along the way. Long tracks were left behind the carriage. From afar, it looked like a small boat slowly pushed aside the green waves under the gentle breeze. It was peaceful and tranquil, but as the saying went, under the seemingly peaceful surface, there was always a hidden danger. Aisha was sitting in the front seat of the car. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a small black dot on a distant hill. Aisha's eyes instantly focused, and her arm shook. Xiaohei borrowed this force and soared into the sky. It flew high and circled twice in the sky before flying back and landing on Aisha's shoulder again. It softly called out in Aisha's ear because it was afraid that Jilin, who was behind it, would find it noisy. There are soldiers from the Nanshin Empire in all directions around us. There are about 15 or 16 of them. Aisha glanced at Jilin, who was guarding Staya. Is that so? Jilin casually replied. He obviously didn't take it to heart. The situation is not right. Aisha said. What's wrong? Jilin tactfully gave Aisha a chance to talk. He now understood that the conversation between humans had to be so harmonious. They're too fast, Aisha said. Maybe they're the people you killed yesterday. They're not ordinary, you mean? I'm lucky. Jilin was slightly happy. There were thousands of humans, and most of them were not special. But he just casually killed a few, and he killed an extraordinary one. What kind of luck was that? What I mean is that we are going to be in trouble soon, Aisha said angrily. Trouble? What kind of trouble is that? Jilin smiled, his face full of disapproval. In his eyes, killing 15 or 16 humans was just a matter of blowing air. These people are just scouts. Aisha glanced at Jilin and said, Scouts. Jilin frowned, indicating that he had never learned this word. Scouts are in the human army, responsible for collecting information about the enemy at the front line. Aisha said, according to the customs of the Nanshin Empire, if they can send out a dozen scouts at once, it means that the incoming army is about 500 to 800 people. 800 people? That's nothing, Jilin said casually. It's 800 cavalry, Aisha said. Isn't it just more horses? Jilin wondered why Aisha was so cautious. Normally, whether it's you or me, 800 cavalry is of course nothing. Aisha glared at Jilin. I can't beat them, but at least I can run away. If it's you, I'm afraid 800 cavalry isn't enough to fill the gaps between your teeth. Nonsense. Jilin was slightly annoyed. The dragon race has no gaps between their teeth. Aisha was so angry that she gritted her teeth so hard that they creaked. She said angrily, I'm not talking about this with you now. Now that Staya is lying here, are you still going to care? Your real body isn't here now. Are you sure you can protect the carriage from the charge of 800 cavalry from the Nanshin Empire? Do you know that the cavalry of the Nanshin Empire can even break through the formation of the Beastmen? Jilin didn't understand. So what if they could break through the formation of the Beastmen? But he understood. Aisha's basic meaning was that the cavalry of the Nanshin Empire was very powerful, and they had to be careful. Just as Jilin and Aisha were talking, the ground suddenly began to tremble slightly, even though the carriage was buffed by wind magic and had a powerful shock-absorbing effect. Aiklin and Aisha were still able to sense it immediately. They're here, Aisha said. Jilin looked in the northwest direction and said to Aisha, should I go and kill them all first? That way, this carriage will be safe. Aisha looked at Jilin. At this moment, even she felt that this was a bit too much. These were the precious lives of 800 people. How could they die so worthlessly? What's wrong? Jilin noticed the way Aisha looked at him. Are you softening your heart? It's not softening my heart. It's not necessary. Aisha shook her head and said, also, don't always think about making things big. If you had done as I said from the beginning, we would have reached the wasteland without anyone knowing. That's too troublesome, Jilin said. Then it's not troublesome if you kill them all the way, Aisha said angrily. Humans were always so prone to conflicts. Even if people had the same goal, they would have differences because of the problem of doing things. Just like robbers and thieves working together, they both wanted to get the money in the pockets of passers-by. The thief displayed his exquisite craftsmanship and got the money without anyone noticing. The robbers relied on their tall and strong men to directly stop the passers-by and ask them a hand over the money. The thieves would despise the robbers for being hotheads who didn't have any skills at all. The robbers would laugh at the thieves for being wishy-washy and doing things that were purely unnecessary. In short, although they weren't good people and didn't do anything good, they still didn't like each other. The robbers and thieves were just like Jilin and Aisha. There was a problem with the internet at home, so it was even later. Sorry that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.